I am going to call the February 3rd meeting of the Los Gatos Town Council to order. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. Our first order of business tonight is our roll call. Madam Clerk.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Mariko Sayak.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Rennie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Barbara Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Marcia Jensen.
Here. And would you all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? And now I'm going to continue a tradition which Steve Leonardis started. Thank you, Steve, which is called Small Business Big Applause. And it's only appropriate that for all you people out there that really want to mark your calendars, February 14th is Valentine's Day. So I'd like to invite the ladies from Bunches up here to receive a proclamation from the town. And come on up. And if you don't know what Bunches is, it's a florist. So we have Marilyn, Becky, Courtney, and Sarah, and who work at Bunches and make the gorgeous flowers that if you're ever lucky enough to get something from Bunches, you know that they're fantastic. Bunches started with its owners with buying a flower farm in Watsonville, and then in 1992 they found the space downtown, which they opened, and they've been serving the community ever since. And you can not only go and pick up fresh stems, but you can get flowers arranged, you can get corsages, you can get lovely Valentine's bouquets, and you can greet Pete the Duck, and if you haven't, you need to go see him. And so we're very pleased that you are doing business here in town. We love your business. I do, for sure. So thank you so much for everything you contribute to the town, and we'd like to give you this lovely proclamation that's signed by the council. In appreciation of your business here. Let's have a round of applause for the ladies from Bunches. And I think Becky wants to say something.
Okay, so first of all, we're all really, really honored to serve the community of Los Gatos and outlying communities too. People come from all over saying, we need a Bunches in here, we need a Bunches in there, but people actually drive to come to Bunches because it is a magical place. I'm like the newest employee. I've been there for, 2 years? How many years, Sarah?
10.
Marilyn?
14.
Courtney?
18.
See? People don't leave. It's an amazing family atmosphere. It really is magical and it's special. Roger and Nancy, the owners, unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. But I think, like Roger likes to say, they're from Chicago, and everybody says, well, how'd you end up in California? Well, we got on the road, we started driving, we ran out of gas in Watsonville, and we decided to stay. And so I think I'm grateful that happened to them, and I think we all are, and the town of Los Gatos as well. They really work hard at bringing quality and an amazing business to the town. So thank you, town of Los Gatos, and Roger and Nancy.
Thanks very much, ladies. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll see you soon.
We'll be around.
Thank you. And now it's time for our closed session report. Mr. Schultz?
Yes. Good evening. Prior to tonight's regular session, Councilman, in closed session to discuss the performance evaluation of the town manager. No action was taken by the council that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. Council members, council matters. This is a time when council members can report to each other and to members of the public about the many committees, commissions, and various other work we do outside of the council as representatives of the town. It's an opportunity to tell you what's going on with other agencies and what your council members are up to between meetings. So let's start with Councilman Rennie. Do you have anything?
I do not.
No worries, that's totally fine. Vice Mayor Spector?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since the last meeting, the Policy Committee has met again. We are going to be going through dozens of policies, and right now we are examining which ones we can batch so we can bring them forward to the council at one time rather than one each time. The Finance Committee met yesterday. Councilmember Leonardis and I. We reviewed the financials for the fiscal year 13-14, and those will be coming forward to the full council at our next meeting, I believe.
Councilwoman Sayoc.
Thank you, Mayor. Two reports. The first is the Housing Element Advisory Board meeting. This occurred last on the 27th. As to continue our discussion on the regional housing numbers that we need to meet, that is 619 units for the next 8 years. No decisions were made, further discussion, and our next meeting will be tomorrow, 7 o'clock in these chambers. Second meeting that I attended on behalf of the town was with the Santa Clara Valley Water Commission. The largest item of discussion was the ongoing drought. There was a 20% call for reduction, and unfortunately for our jurisdiction, we reached 13% cumulative. And so there was a large discussion on what are the next steps should our drought continue.
Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. As previously stated by Vice Mayor Spector, I attended the Finance Committee meeting, and the town is in very good financial shape based on what we saw the other day.
Thank you, and I will just say that I participated in the Policy Committee and the Housing Element Advisory Board. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for those reports. Are there any manager matters?
Yes. 3 items, Mayor and Council. First, we have a new exhibition here in the council chambers that was installed last week. These are oil paintings provided by advanced art students of the Los Gatos High School Art Department under teacher Thad Smith. The artist reception will be this Thursday, February 5th, here in the chambers, and these art pieces will be on display through April. Second, February is always an exciting month. On February 11th, we'll be celebrating the 3rd anniversary of the new library with a series of activities all day, starting with a 10:30 a.m. story walk guided by our youth librarians for youth and families to go up to Pageant Park and back to the library, focused on ages 2 to 5, 2 to 3:30 p.m. with a teen celebration with a DJ company and slideshow. Then the actual reception and birthday party, including cake, will be from 3:30 to 5 in the library, followed at 5 p.m. by librarian Melissa Maglio doing a brief history of the Los Gatos Library. Last, staff has provided an addendum for the consent calendar. It's for item 1B, minutes for the January 20th meeting, correcting the motion regarding the Veterans Memorial. Council adoption of the consent calendar will include that recommendation to modify the motion as presented unless the council directs otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Now is the time for the council to consider those items on the consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of items that have been determined by staff and to be essentially non-controversial or ministerial, and as such they are adopted in a single motion. Tonight they consist of approval of minutes of our special meeting of January 13th regarding Hillbrook, our meeting of January 20th, and that's the correction, actually the amplification, I'll call it, that Mr. Larson was referring to, where instead of a summary of the motion that was made by Vice Mayor Spector with respect to the Veterans Memorial, the verbatim transcript of that motion is now going to be included in our minutes, is the request. The second item is authorizing the town manager to purchase 2 Ford Escapes for our Parks and Public Works Department, which happens per an evaluation that vehicles need replacing. The third item is to accept as completed work that was done to improve paving and other kinds of issues at Blossom Hill Park. So those are the things that are on our consent calendar. Does anyone on the council wish to pull an item? Mr. Rennie?
I'd like to have a short discussion on number 2, the vehicle purchase.
Okay. And when an item is pulled, what we do is we hear it in its normal order as a public hearing. So number 2 is pulled by Councilman Rennie. Anyone else? Does anyone in the audience want to pull one of the items from our consent calendar? Do I have a motion on our consent calendar as is now consisting of 1 and 3? Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the consent calendar existing of items 1 and 3.
Is there a second? Seconded by the Vice Mayor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. So before we get to item number 2, then we'll hear it in its normal course. We'll go on to the next part of our agenda, which is verbal communications. Verbal communications is a time when anyone in the audience can address us on something that is not on tonight's agenda. So the items we now have on tonight's agenda are a discussion regarding vehicle replacement, information item on senior group homes, which is an item giving the council information regarding transferring affordable housing units, the request for a conditional use permit by the museums of Los Gatos, and the North 40. As those of you in the audience are aware, we have closed the public hearing on the North 40, and I have a lot of cards for verbal communications, and the only thing I'll say to some of you who I have cards for is that I sure hope you're not talking about the North 40, because I will call you out on it. So the first person is, and you have 3 minutes to address the council. Lee Quintana.
Lee Quintana, and I'm not talking about the North 40. I would just like to thank the council for passing the noise leaf blower ordinance on behalf of myself and my neighborhood, and hopefully the rest of the town. It is measurably quiet, and I thank you for that.
Wow, you have another 2 minutes to thank us if you want to. Thank you, Ms. Quintana. Angelia Dorner.
Hopefully that's about right. I'm Angelia Dorner, a proud resident of the Almond Grove. I doubt there is anyone in town who is not aware of the long overdue work that needs to be done on the streets, curbs, gutters, and sidewalks of the Almond Grove. We were quite pleased with you when you revisited this need in detail with Parks and Public Works 2 years ago. Unfortunately, there is only $4 million identified for what is purportedly a $12 million project. You expressed your willingness to accept asphalt instead of concrete to help curb some of the costs. You're very familiar with the pros and cons between the two. Costs to maintain concrete are lower, but that's because there is no way to repair concrete once it has cracked. All you can do is replace it. However, with asphalt, at least we would be in queue with all the other town residential streets to simply get a facelift every 7 to 10 years. But the real issue is that the Almond Grove is a historical district. I'm happy to report that the HPC met this last week, and the 3 of the 4 members present agreed, and I'm paraphrasing, if there is a material that can be used that provides the aesthetics of concrete, it might be okay. I would like to discuss those aesthetics a little further with you. This slide was shown by PPW at our last outreach meetings. It's definitely asphalt. It's very black, and you can almost feel the heat radiating from the surface. But there is asphalt, and then there is asphalt. This is an intersection between University and Miles, the main entrance to the Edelin Historical District. Both are asphalt, but wow, what a difference between the two. There is concrete, and this is showing a intersection of Massal and Nicholson, and this is asphalt, which is facing north on Edelin. Can't the Almond Grove streets use this kind of asphalt? Let's look at another comparison. This is a view of Wilder Avenue. If you look closer, you'll even see grass growing up between the cracks. And this is a view of Edelin. Can't the Almond Grove streets use this kind of asphalt? So what kind of asphalt has PPW talked about? They showed us cost savings between two different asphalt choices. The first being a 21% savings, which was the first slide I showed you, and the second with 55% cost savings, which is really a rubberized overlay, even darker and hotter. After continual questions from residents about color variances of asphalt, PPW finally said it could be mixed with a cementitious material, but that it was costly. They didn't offer any other data. From the get-go, town staff has appeared to take an adversarial position concerning the materials question. Why? Why not encourage, even promote meaningful, educated discussion about the issue? PPW has to drive past this intersection to and from work every single day. Why haven't they offered data on this kind of asphalt? I look forward to March 3rd when hopefully they give us some more information about this option.
Thank you, Ms. Dorner. Are there any questions for Ms. Dorner? Thank you very much. Jeff Lockridge?
Hi, my name is Jeff Lockridge, 109 Paseo Laura. I'd like to voice my concerns regarding how the town distributes information. I've signed up with the town to be able to receive information on what's new in town, along with information regarding the town council, planning commissions, and others. While I do receive packet information for the town council and planning commission meetings, what I receive for the what's new portion leaves a bit to be desired. Let me show you what I have. So,
Can we make that a little bigger?
So what it shows you is in the subject matter is the only new thing on that whole email. The rest of the email is links to the town website. So I don't know if anyone has ever navigated the town website, but it's kind of hard and it's not necessarily intuitive. I would expect someone from staff to put together an email that goes to the same D list as this, and it would have several items on it, and they would be linked right to where they needed to go. It doesn't seem very hard to me, but I know that this thing probably is generated automatically and probably requires the least amount of hand touching it, but it doesn't help the town residents who signed up for what's new. I've also got an issue with the official notice given residents regarding a pending project. I've been told by staff that based on state rules, officially they only have to give notice to residents within 300 feet of a pending project. Also, according to staff, they generously notice residents within 500 feet. The problem with either of these is that our town, to provide full transparency, needs to notice all residents affected by the pending project. So for instance, official notification for the North 40 project was just 500 feet. 500 feet also for the proposed AHAS sites. And yet, if these projects were to go through, it would affect many more residents than just those within 500 feet. I'm sorry that my disappointment shows through, but I expect more from my town. I'm struggling along with many others to stay abreast of developments both good and bad in town. So I was surprised and a bit more disappointed today when I got a message from a friend who lives in the south end of town. They asked me whether I'd seen the recent town notice. The notice was delivered via the web service called Nextdoor. Nextdoor is a great idea to get the word out to a select few. I stress that because I've been unable to post anything on Nextdoor and have anyone be able to see it who lives downtown or the surrounding areas. So the message today was from Greg Larson. I can only hope that he was posting this as a resident and not in any official capacity, as it was only seen by downtown or close to downtown residents. Nextdoor is a free web service that offers to connect you with not only your neighborhood, but other nearby neighborhoods. I'd suggest if the word needs to get out about something, I'd start with those who have already opted into notifications from the town.
Thank you, Mr. Lockridge. Barbara Holden.
My name is Barbara Ferry Holden. I've been living on Bicknell Road for 20 years. My mother was on the Monte Sereno City Council for 16 years. I care about our community a lot. I am personally responsible for the transformation of the southwest corner of Highway 9 in North Santa Cruz from asphalt to plants. I worked on the beautification committee. I've worked on the planning commission. Those are my credentials. And I just put in some oaks on Bicknell Road. Yes. Okay, so, dear council, I think it might be a good idea to consider getting our police services from the sheriff. We can keep all our employees and save money. As has been pointed out before, the sheriff response time is roughly equivalent to the Los Gatos Police Department's response time. Los Gatos Police Department has many extra services. So does the sheriff department. Today or yesterday, a prosecutor for the DA opened her case based on evidence gathered by the sheriff. Her name is Alalay Kianersi, and her case looks good. I would be so proud to be represented by her. She's really cool. If we were to shift, that's the Stanford rape case, just in case you care. If we were to shift to the sheriff, we could afford a downtown parking garage, more funds for our local schools, my pet peeve, making North Santa Cruz look good, steam cleaning and better trees, renovating the Almond Grove streets, giving hot lunches to all our low-income seniors, which is actually kind of expensive, and traffic management on North Santa Cruz. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Holden. Andy Wu.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'm sorry I couldn't be here last week for when you had the Veterans Memorial debate. I did watch it on KCAT, and I wish I could have spoken then, but I'm sort of glad I didn't because I don't want to get beat up on the way out. There was one young ranger, I remember coming up to the podium and saying that he had fallen out of a helicopter. The first thing that came to my mind was, well, you should have been trained better because you should have stood out on the skids. Bad joke. But then he was very indignant, and I felt the same way that young veteran did, that it was an indignant feeling that he had that the rest of the civilian population doesn't appreciate what our veterans have had to go through. But then I thought again, well, you know what? None of us did it for you. We did it for ourselves, whether it was out of economic opportunity, sense of patriotism, whether you're a legacy or for some people, they just like to fight. We didn't do it for you. So none of you owe us anything. But we do expect some understanding. I understand that, Madam Mayor, you've been to the Vietnam Memorial, and you said you had a childhood friend whose name is on that wall. I've been there twice. I have a personal connection to that wall. Next time you go, I would encourage you to go visit panels 162 and 163 East. Those are the names of the veterans who were originally on the MIA list, were then subsequently put on the KIA list. They were originally not included on that wall. That is a very powerful thing. And only after that point in time, when the American League of Families pushed Congress for 2 years to identify our missing veterans during the Vietnam conflict, did those families finally find peace with the names that were put on 162 and 163 East. The memorial that the veterans want, it's not for you. It's for them. It's a place that they can congregate and reminisce about their friends lost, the burdens and the scars that they'll carry, and only they can carry it. We don't expect anybody else to carry it for us, but it's for them. And if you don't want that memorial there, I can understand it. If you don't want statuary there, I can understand that too. I read with some dismay that the veterans are now seeking to perhaps abandon the project. I would encourage this council to find a way of moving forward, because I think this town, above all else, deserves, and the veterans deserve, to be remembered at this memorial.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. John Shepherdson.
First, I want to say thank you to former council members Diane McNutt and Joe Przinski for their many years of service on the council. The pay is low, the hours are long, and the decisions often difficult and contentious. It's easy to criticize from the gallery while they acted in the arena. The town at one time was heavily dependent on our car dealerships for revenue. The dealerships are largely gone now. Next, we were dependent for approximately, as I understand it, 40% of our revenues from the Netflix DVD sales, and that's largely gone. With the loss of these revenues, the town needed new sources of income. The new sources were things like property tax income from the Albright buildings, PAMP, Swanson Ford site, and others. New jobs bring with it a requirement by the state for mandated housing units. I think it's 619, it was mentioned earlier. These mandated housing units result in more children impacting our schools. In a nutshell, commercial growth begets residential growth, which begets school population growth. Residential growth is a net drain on town resources, which begets the need for more commercial growth. This is leapfrog growth. How can we avoid or minimize the leapfrog growth pattern so our town does not turn into a city? One possible way is to save upwards of $6 million a year in town expenditures by switching to the sheriff's department. With these savings, we would not be financially dependent on new commercial projects to fund services. We could have the financial freedom to say no to no more big developments that bring traffic, like the approximate 2,000 cars per day that will be coming from the Albright project. With the savings, we could do things like fund school buses or free shuttle buses like at Stanford University, which has a highly effective traffic management program. We can install smart lights that potentially move traffic more efficiently. These two changes could potentially reduce traffic by 50%. A good model is Danville. We could also use the savings to fix the Almond Grove streets or build a community center. I sat through a session involving the Almond Grove streets, and actually I was horrified. I really felt bad for these people that for decades they've been waiting for the repair of the streets. And as a lawyer, I'm concerned about the legal liability because if someone's driving along and hits a pothole, there could be exposure there. The potential $6 million in annual savings for the town could set us on a sound financial path for the next 50 years. And that, I submit to you, our town leadership, would be quite a legacy you could leave to those that come after us. I urge those watching and here tonight to email the council and request a comprehensive review for a possible switch to the Sheriff's Department.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. That's all the cards I have for verbal communication. Thank you all for speaking to us. We appreciate it. We'll now move on to our pulled item for our first public hearing, which is number 2. And I'll ask Councilman Rennie just to state briefly your reasons for pulling it, and then we'll have Mr. Morley make a presentation.
Sure. So when I looked at it, I looked at it from kind of a sustainability issue. So one of the questions I'm going to lead up to is, do we have a sustainability policy that guides us in purchasing these? Did you consider a hybrid type vehicle? The escapes that you were planning to get at 22 miles per gallon in the city, and I figure you're going to be doing mostly city driving with them. I realize you're replacing Rangers, which probably had 17, so you're improving the gas mileage. But when I did a little Googling, I found that hybrid escapes were 34 miles per gallon. Seems like a smarter choice. With just minimal effort, I could not find what the price of a hybrid escape was in comparison. They may not be offering it anymore. Maybe we can look other than Ford if that's the case. So that's where I'm going with it.
Thank you, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. We do look at hybrids or alternate fuel vehicles as our first choice when we're replacing vehicles, and where appropriate, we would make that recommendation. In this particular case, you hit the nail on the head. Ford no longer offers the hybrid escape. We own a couple of them that are hybrid escapes, and like them and wish that they were still in being manufactured, but they unfortunately are not. So as an alternative, we looked at other small SUVs, and the goal here was to keep the vehicle small, but also allow the flexibility for the end user, in this case, inspectors that are out and about and have the need to carry some covered type loads. So we looked at perhaps a Toyota RAV4, which is an all-electric vehicle. The cost on the RAV is above $40,000, so it was a significant cost increase, and we thought that wasn't warranted in this particular case. So our recommendation here is the Escape.
Mr. Rennie, you have follow-up?
I think that answers the question, I guess. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have a question for Mr. Morley on this matter? Thank you, Mr. Morley. Since this has been pulled from the consent calendar and is a public hearing, if anyone in the audience would like to talk to the council about the purchase of the Ford Escapes, now's your opportunity. Not seeing anyone. I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm not going to look to the council for questions, but I am going to look to the council for a motion. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I want to thank Council Member Rennie for pulling this item for the reason that he did, and I appreciate that. Having said that, I thought that Mr. Morley made a good response, and I'm going to move to authorize the town manager to execute an agreement with Downtown Ford for the purchase of 2 compact Ford Escapes in the amount not to exceed $51,988.
So we have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Councilman Leonardis?
Thank you, Mayor. Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. So we will move on to item number 4, which is our requested information back on the senior group homes transfer. And who's going to be talking to us about that? Ms. Pravetti.
Thank you. Laurel Pravetti, Assistant Town Manager and Community Development Director. The item before you tonight is a transfer of 2 group homes that provide affordable housing to seniors here in town. We did bring this forward to you in December of 2014. At that time, the council requested financial information as well as information regarding how other cities are treating the proposed transfer from senior home services to Charities Housing. You have been provided with a lot of information. I know it was probably a lot to go through. In addition, you received an addendum yesterday from our finance director with his opinion regarding the financials. In summary, what you'll find is that Charities Housing is proposing a very different business model than what the prior owner had suggested. They are using more of a real estate model in which every property in the cities are going to have their own LLC. So essentially, there'll be a limited liability corporation created just for the 2 Los Gatos homes. It will be separate and independent from all of the other properties that they are assuming from the other communities. This ensures that the cash flow will stay within the town and benefit the residents within that home. Dan Wu, who is the Executive Director of Charities Housing, is in the audience if you have more detailed questions about their business practices, and with that, staff is recommending approval of the proposed transfer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pravetti. Are there questions? Councilman Rennie.
For the gentleman you mentioned. So when I looked at, I was one of the ones that requested the financial statements last time to be provided. And what we got back was a consolidated financial statement for SHA, the old housing organization, and it didn't really say why it failed. So when I looked through all the material, and there was a report from Milpitas that basically said something to the effect, the 2 units in Milpitas and 1 in Cupertino did not have Section 8 funding, and they were basically eating up all the cash from the other properties, and all the other properties were cash positive. So I guess I just want to make sure that so it looks like now to me with the new, since we put the 2 Los Gatos ones in an LLC by themselves, how are they going to deal with the Milpitas one? They're not going to be able to pull cash out of Los Gatos, which the statement has it as a positive $30,000 a year. So it looks like a good fit. But my question for the gentleman would be, how are you going to deal with Milpitas, and are you going to come rob us?
So, Mr. Wu, hopefully you're not going to rob us, but you can come to the podium, and if you can answer that question, and later on, if you would just fill out a card like this so we can have you in our record.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Dan Wu. I'm the Executive Director of Charities Housing. And to directly answer your question, yes, Milpitas is in a negative cash flow situation. And the town of Milpitas actually has already approved a $450,000 operating reserve for those properties. So they will be set aside just for the Milpitas property, and they will be operated within a separate LLC so that it's not commingled with all the other entities properties that were assumed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Wu or Ms. Pravetti? Councilman Leonardis. Don't run away, Mr. Wu.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. Just a question of staff. So in the previous staff report on this item, it was requested of the town that we would be loaning money for the repairs. Is that still on the table?
Yes, it is.
Okay, it wasn't clear in the staff report to me. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Wu? So I'll let him sit down. Thank you, sir. Any other questions for staff? Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Following up on Councilmember Leonardis so that we can put this all in context, the amount that is being requested is how much?
Okay, there are two rehabilitation loans totaling $159,000. Of that, $105,000 would be for the Blossom Hill Road home and $54,000 for the Anway house. And as you recall in the staff report dated December 5th, there's some of them are termite damage and other repairs. The more expensive Blossom Hill Road house also includes improvements to the solar facility, and that is, I did check state law as we've been working on our housing element, and it is appropriate for affordable housing monies to be spent on energy conservation. So that is something that is identified in state law as something eligible should that be something of interest to the town council.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilwoman Sayoc.
Okay, and it's, since you mentioned the housing element and since that's on my mind, because we are creating a new LLC with these units, is there any way we can count this towards our regional housing numbers because of the large infusion of cash we are putting towards this?
No, these are existing homes, and we're essentially maintaining the housing available to existing seniors.
Okay.
Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. So is our arrangement as proposed contingent upon us loaning money to this new entity? Or can we just sign the agreement transferring the properties to the new entity but not loan them the money?
From staff's discussion with Charities Housing staff, they are willing to work with us. So if there are some line items that the council is not comfortable with, we could certainly make that adjustment. I think the termite damage and other necessary repairs seem to be eligible. All the repairs and proposals are consistent with our practices for the use of the below market price housing funds. So it is within your discretion.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilman Rennie.
I guess I have another one. So when I read the different reports, there was one for the county which talked about basically SHS had gone out of business, and there was, maybe it was the Catholic Charities had been taking care of it and was requesting reimbursement from all the towns. But I don't think I see that line item in the money that we're being asked to pay.
There is a reimbursement for some of the work that they've been doing in terms of just the actual transfer documents. So that is included as one of the line items. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Charities Housing. So if there are differences of opinion, I just would invite Mr. Wu, if it's appropriate, to speak as well. But yes, it is identified that there would be some reimbursement for just the paperwork part of the transfer.
I have a question before Councilman Leonardis. Along the lines of Vice Mayor Spector, just to make sure that I understand the monies involved both in approving this and the ramifications for our affordable housing. If the council were to approve this and transfer the monies, how much money do we have left in our BMP and LUFI funds?
Let's see. I believe we're, I think we have let's see, the two loans totaling 159 would be coming from the BMP Housing in Lieu, and the fund currently has a balance of $2.6 million.
Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. And I hope this is my last question. What other alternatives have we explored besides just Catholic Charities coming along and acquiring these properties from us?
No other entity has come forward to assist in this situation. The other alternative is that the town could become the landlord, and then we would have all the obligations to deal with tenants and do the repairs ourselves, and we're really not set up for that. So that is the other choice that the council has. There are no other affordable housing entities that have come forward to express interest in this.
But in that second circumstance, we would retain ownership of the property, so it would be an asset that we would still own.
That's correct, but then you would have the maintenance obligation. You would need to identify staff who would be essentially the property manager, or you would need to contract out property management services, tenant services, et cetera.
All right. Thank you.
Other questions, discussion, or a motion? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Councilwoman Sayak.
Okay, I appreciate all the questions that were asked, not only at this meeting, but at the previous meeting. I certainly feel comfortable with the financial information provided to us. It's a priority for the town of Los Gatos to provide affordable housing for not only all our residents, but as well as for our seniors. And so given the information in this packet as well as in previous, I move to approve the senior group's home transfer and rehabilitation loans at 185 Anway and 14390 Blossom Hill Road.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second. I'll second.
Seconded by Councilman Leonardis. I have a question. Councilwoman Sayak, is your motion including Resolution 2014, which is attachment 1 of our December 16th packet?
Yes, it is.
Or are you asking for a new resolution?
Actually, no, attaching what is in our packet.
Okay. Questions, comments on the motion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Wu, for being here. So we'll move on to our next public hearing, which is conditional use permit application U-13-017. It's at 106 East Main Street. It is requesting a conditional use permit to operate a museum for the Museums of Los Gatos and related activities on property zoned C-1:PD. Ms. Savage.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. The the Museums of Los Gatos has two components, both an art and history museum component. They would also offer educational activities and museum events, which would include demonstrations and exhibit openings. The Museums of Los Gatos is also asking to offer the space for private events as a source of revenue. On December 10th, the Planning Commission reviewed the project and recommended approval with modifications. These modifications included the intent to allow the museum more opportunities for private and museum events. but still making sure that those additional opportunities do not conflict with town meetings or other events here at the Civic Center. There is alternative language provided in the addendum and the desk item for the council's consideration. The lease allows the use or uses that are approved through the conditional use permit. The proposed conditional use permit contains limitations that are more specific than the lease, but are typical for conditional use permits. The council may choose to modify conditions and may choose to require the lease to be modified consistent with the conditional use permit. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Savage? Councilwoman Sayoc.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify the private event rentals. When it says that the space may be rented out, we're strictly talking about the interior, correct? We're not talking about the outside spaces, such as the deck, the Civic Center Plaza area?
That is correct.
Okay.
So I had a related question, actually, and one of the conditions limits the number of people to 253, and that's based on the capacity for the inside. So my question was, are you just talking about the inside? Because what if my event goes to the out to the outside?
Thank you. So it is just for the occupancy for the outside. Should a private event want to hold any activities on the deck above us, above the council chambers, there are no provisions at this time to allow uses or rental of the deck above us. If the private party or even the museums wanted to hold events outside, there is no occupancy for the exterior events, but if they wanted to hold it in the in Pageant Park or out on the front lawn, there are provisions and policies within the town that they would have to follow.
Okay, any other questions for Ms. Savage? Thank you. I don't have any cards. Does anyone want to talk to us about this? Mr. Janoff, will you fill out a card, please?
Can I do it after the fact? Jeffrey Janoff, thank you. President of the museum. The only addition that we have for the CUP that we talked about that isn't in the CUP was just to change Thursday from being closed at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. only because our new director envisions programming on Thursday nights, and we want to keep that consistent for as long as we're there. And so that the public gets to know this is a Thursday night event at the museum.
Questions for Mr. Janoff? Thank you very much. Ms. Quintana. Mr. Janoff, I think you're excused.
Thank you.
No one has any questions for you. Thank you very much.
Lee Quintana, I just have one question. I have not read through all the conditions, so I don't know the answer to this. As in terms of music, should they have events outside, does the conditional use permit contain any condition regarding amplified music, since there are residents above and across the street?
Well, I can actually tell you that it has a condition regarding entertainment, but it's not specific as to amplified music.
Okay. Then I would ask you to consider having a specific condition.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to speak regarding the museum's requested conditional use permit? Okay, I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing. Look to the council. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So that I know that the same thing that you and Ms. Quintana know, what is the current condition as it relates to amplified or non-amplified music?
Ms. Savage, can you let us know that?
There is a condition regarding entertainment, number 11, in Exhibit A of Attachment 2, and it speaks to art and history performances being permitted, but no other entertainment is permitted unless it's consistent with town code and policies, as may be amended in the future. One thing to note is that there are policies that are exist today for use outside, as mentioned earlier, and those policies do speak to outdoor music. One moment, please. I apologize, I actually don't have that policy with me before me, but there are regulations in place regarding uses outside.
Any other questions for the staff? I have a question for you, Ms. Savage, or whoever is appropriate. Suggested conditions 21, 22, and 23 are to the satisfaction of the Chief of Police and have to do with alcoholic beverage service notification 2 weeks in advance, uniform security, consultation, and training. My question is that consistent with other uses or other conditional use permits? Because I don't recall seeing something like that before.
Yes, there are a couple of police conditions not included in this application because they are not applicable. But in the town's current alcoholic beverage policy, there are 5 conditions that are typical in conditional use permits that involve alcoholic service beverage.
Okay, so does Music in the Park have to tell the police 2 weeks in advance that it's going to serve alcohol?
It is part of the use, so the police department is informed that the event would occur and that it would include alcoholic beverages.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. Mr. Janoff expressed a desire for an 8 o'clock closing on Thursday, and all the other days are stating 7 o'clock. Is there any issue with potentially granting that 8 o'clock closing on a Thursday, such as the library being open later that evening or anything you can think of?
There is no conflict that we're aware of in terms of town operations. The only conflict is that the existing lease between the museums of Los Gatos and the town of Los Gatos says that the hours have to end at 7. So should the town council be amenable to the 8 o'clock on Thursday, they should consider modifying the lease.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. I guess I already did, huh? Look to the council for a motion or discussion. Vice Mayor Spector.
Or to go to the discussion. I raised a couple of issues that have been addressed in the addendum. Remembering the process that this council went through in reaching the lease terms with the museum, it was significant to me that the CUP be consistent with the lease. And we now know that it is, with the exception of the request for an 8 o'clock closing on Thursday. The other thing that was important to me is in reading through the staff's report, there was repeated reference to the town manager's office approving exceptions, but there was no process. And I wanted to avoid something where the applicant says, well, we got approval, and the town manager's office says, no, you didn't. And that was the request I made, which concluded itself in the proposed coordination condition little d. Thank you.
Any other discussion or a motion? Okay, I'll try a motion. My motion would be to approve the conditional use permit that is wherever it is, U-13-017, project location 106 East Main Street, using the resolution which is attachment 2 and the conditions that are attached to that. I would adopt the desk item changes for items, conditions number 5 and 7, including subparagraph D that the Vice Mayor has just referenced. I would make the exception to condition 4 to extend the hours on Thursday to 8 p.m. And I would change condition 11 to delete the phrase, comma, as amended, so that it would read, art and history performances are permitted other entertainment must be consistent with town codes and policies. The reason I would want to delete as amended is because it may not be amended, and it may be continuously amended. So I think it's sufficient to indicate that it needs to comply with whatever town code and policy is in place. So that's the reason for my motion to delete that particular phrase. And with that, that's my motion. Councilman Leonardis.
I'll second the motion.
Motion's made and seconded with the notes that are noted changes. Any discussion on the motion or questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. So we are going to move on to item number 6, which I'm just simply going to identify as the North 40. And I will give a little preamble before we start. And that is that, as all of you know who are interested in this item, it's been under discussion by the town, with the town, through the town for many years. It's gone through the North 40 Advisory Committee. It's gone to council a couple of times. It's gone through the Planning Commission. And after the Planning Commission, it's come back to the council a few times. On each occasion that I've cited, there has been public input, public testimony, and public hearing. At our last meeting on this in December, we actually reopened the public hearing after it had been closed and certified the EIR, indicating that the EIR was sufficient under the law, that it met the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, and left any findings or any other required statements to be handled on a different day, depending on what, if any, specific plan ended up being adopted by the council. So tonight is since that time that the public meeting has been closed, the council has continued to receive written input, emails from you. We've received desk items tonight. I'll just cite Los Gatos Community Alliance desk item, one from Ms. Katana, one from the lawyers for the Yuki family, and numerous other input that we've received as council members since our last meeting. So I want to assure everyone that the council has certainly heard, understood, read, and considered all of your input, and we very much appreciate it. So we're going to proceed with a council discussion tonight without public input, and I have asked the staff to go through this discussion in a certain way, which I've actually shared with members of the council, and hopefully the staff is going to give us those points. And we'll keep these bullets up along with, when it's appropriate, a page reference or a chart reference so that members of the audience can follow and the council can follow what our discussion is going to be. So if you look at the bullets that are up on the screen, that's how we intend to start. So Ms. Pravetti, is there a staff presentation?
No, you've already acknowledged the desk items and addenda that are before you. The team is here, including Parks and Public Works staff, Economic Vitality consultants. Joel Paulson has significant experience with the history of the program, town attorney, and myself. So we're available as a resource as you continue your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pravetti. Before we start, let me ask the council if there's questions for the staff before we begin our discussion. Okay. I don't see any. So, Vice Mayor Spector.
No question, but maybe we need to do disclosures from the last meeting.
Sure, let's go ahead. Councilman Rennie.
Since the last meeting, I've met with Grosvenor and Summerhill, and I also had a meeting with several members of the Community Alliance.
Since the last meeting, I've met with Don Capobres of Grosvenor and Lockridge, Quintana, residents Lockridge, Quintana, Van Nada, and Risto of the Community Alliance.
I will simply echo what the Vice Mayor said. I've also had those meetings with those people. I have discussed matters that tangentially relate to the North 40 with school board members, but that's it. Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. I have met with representatives from Grosvenor, as well as Summerhill, as well as various members in the community.
Councilwoman Sayak.
I'll echo that I've met with representatives from Grosvenor, Summerhill, Los Gatos Union School District, as well as many interested members of the community.
And I'm going to just state for everyone that we have read everything that we have been given regarding this project by email, letter, or whatever other device we may have gotten it. And again, thank you. So, Council, what I'd like to do is direct your attention to the bullets and/or the outline that you were provided for tonight. And what we're doing is starting from a top-down approach with a discussion of the specific plan itself, whether or not that continues to be the right planning approach or tool for this project. And so let's just start with the discussion of the specific plan. If there's anything to discuss, does anyone have any input regarding continued use of the notion of a specific plan? Okay, no one seems to have an objection to that. So I'll just say, for purposes of explanation for those who are in the audience and who may be watching, the general plan calls for a specific plan, which is essentially a framework, an outline that the town develops and adopts for development of a particular property, in this case, the North 40 specific plan area. And it is not an application. It is an outline for what the town would like to see for future development. And that's the direction that the town has chosen to take in its general plan. And it seems like with the, I'm just going to look for consensus, I guess, raise hands of the council for those who think that the specific plan continues to be what the town should be doing. So I'm seeing a consensus for that. So we will move on to a discussion of the vision statement. And Mr. Paulson, if you could put that up so everybody can see what we're talking about. And if you're following along and you happen to have your own very own specific plan in your lap, it's at highlighted box on page 1.1. So the question for us to discuss for the vision statement is, if those of you who have been following this project, it went through the North 40 Advisory Board for some time, and then the general plan, it came to the council, and the Grosvenor representative will know the exact date. I can't remember, but there was a time when the council decided that what it needed to do was adopt a vision plan or a vision statement for the specific plan, and what you see on the board was the result. And so my question for my fellow council members is does this still reflect the vision that the council sees for this specific plan area? If it does, do we agree with it? Do we think there's changes that need to be made? Do we think that it needs to be more clear? So I would look to the council for any discussion of the vision statement. Councilwoman Sayak.
Okay, what I'd like to do is point to the third. The North 40 will address the town's residential and/or commercial unmet needs. Given the history of where we were when this vision statement was created, the context and the environment of what we are now looking at has changed significantly. And what I would like is to add at the end of that and state requirements, so that it would read, the North 40 will address the town's residential and/or commercial unmet needs and state housing requirements. So,
okay, I'm going to make sure that we get this right for the record. First time you said state requirements. The second time you said
housing
state housing requirements. Okay, so you are looking for a housing, essentially a housing element statement on the vision.
Correct.
Statement. Okay. Anyone else? Councilman Rennie.
Actually, I'll just echo what Councilwoman Sayak. I was thinking exactly that. I would have stated it in terms of try to meet our RENA numbers with this, and but the way she stated it sounds fine to me.
Anyone else on that point? Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question of staff. I'm looking that way and left. Let's put aside my personal opinion about RENA numbers and how we may or may not meet them. But To the extent that we have a RENA obligation, and to the extent that housing may be constructed on the North 40 at some point in time, wouldn't those numbers count against our RENA obligation?
We are still in the process, as you know, of identifying how the town would like to meet its regional housing needs allocation or RENA number. We have identified a variety of adequate sites that the Housing Element Advisory Board is still considering and debating, and no decision has been made. Once the board does identify those adequate sites, then those are the sites that we will be facilitating housing through a variety of programmatic elements. So that's the housing element where we're planning for housing. The work that you're doing here on the specific plan, and in the event it is approved and ultimately housing is approved, then as we do our annual housing element progress report, we would be able to acknowledge our progress towards meeting our housing element obligations. So whether or not it depends whether or not this site ends up being within our housing element and whether or not we'll be acknowledging any progress regardless. But if in fact this does become part of our housing element, we'll be paying higher attention to whether or not it is providing housing.
Madam Mayor, if I might. I'm going to make it easier for myself. Let's say the RENA numbers say we should have 600 new homes in Los Gatos. And let's say that the North 40 is not included in your housing element, but let's say 300 homes are built on the North 40. Couldn't the 300 be subtracted from the 600 when we report out to the state?
It will be, but it would be essentially extra capacity that the town has created.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just make a statement for any of you who, on the off chance you don't know what RENA is. It's an acronym, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and it's set by the Association of Bay Area Governments, and it is a number of housing units that ABAG has determined through a criteria process that each community in the Bay Area must demonstrate that it can provide for affordable housing. So when you hear people say RENA, that's what they mean. Councilman Leonardis, did you have any comment on the vision statement?
Well, going back to what Ms. Pravetti said, could we potentially mandate that if this project were approved and let's just say there were 364 units added, could we specifically state we want these 364 units to count towards our RENA numbers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilman Rennie, before I call on you, I'm going to ask a question. At the Housing Element Advisory Board, and Mr. Schultz may want to answer this as well, we have been discussing, the board has been discussing whether to include any residential units on the North 40 in our plan to meet state requirements. And my question is, if the council were to specifically designate in the vision statement or elsewhere in the plan units towards the RENA, would there be different development and review standards for those units than there might be under the normal town processes of review?
So yes, under your housing, your RENA numbers, once you designate those, and that's what we've talked about, you have your by right. So it could potentially be different. Hopefully through your specific plan, though, you're going to have a specific plan that has those guidelines that will give the developer or the property owner knowledge of exactly what you're looking for in the type of unit, so that it's potentially possible that that project would go through, though, the same process of just an A&S design guidelines review to be approved also. So I'm not sure if I'm quite answering it, but it certainly has a different requirement once you designate them as RENA under your housing element.
So I think you've answered it, but just to be absolutely clear, that if in the specific plan there were, for example, 100 units designated as RHNA housing for purposes of our state requirements, then the review that the town would make once an application came in for 100 houses would be limited to determining whether it was in compliance with whatever was in the specific plan, but nothing else. No CEQA review, no traffic review, no height review, no nothing.
And that's possible without it being named as your arena numbers. That's possible that because you're doing CEQA with your specific plan, that, and the end game is that they could come in with 100 units and just go through the ANS process and be approved without any CEQA because you've already done that CEQA through your specific plan.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Councilman Rennie.
So my comment question is along the same lines. So my understanding is what we would need to do in the specific plan is designated as a minimum of 20 units per acre, which is, I think, what Summerhill's plan already, combination of Summerhill, Grosvenor, Eden's plan is already. Then we could include that in our housing element, and that would allow us to take some of the AHOS sites off. And my understanding is this would be superior to Los Gatos because with the specific plan, we get more local control. As soon as we put an AHOZ zone on, AHOS zone on, we lose a lot of our local control. We can ask for less things. We can put less stipulations on it. It's kind of fast-tracked through. Is my understanding correct?
The by right provisions would apply both to the North 40 and to the affordable housing overlay or AHOS sites, as our town attorney just described. So if it is the will of the council to consider the North 40 when the housing element comes before you, then the 20 units to the acre would be one way of having it qualify. The act of rezoning essentially establishes the by right. We've already zoned the AHOS sites, so that action already occurred with community process and noticing, et cetera. So you would essentially level the playing field between both.
If I can follow up. So part of the AHOS zones is 20 acres per unit plus another 35% bonus, but do we have to give the 35% bonus on the in the specific plan also?
You probably will, yes. Because you would meet the minimum. If the project qualified under the state guidelines and a developer requested a 35% state density bonus, then yes, you would be obligated to provide that.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The addition of the wording state housing requirements, I think that was the suggestion by Ms. Sayoc. That is not something, I'm going to have to listen to all of you, but right now it is not something that I would add. First of all, I would not add it because the vision statement and guiding principles as they now stand are not mutually exclusive of that concept. And secondly, those RHNA numbers and their ramifications to our town still have to be vetted by the housing board, and they're having I don't know if they're having a challenge with it. They may be having a challenge with it. Then it's going to go to the Planning Commission, and then it's going to go to the council. So I'm not prepared at this juncture to add that phrase. Because it may have the negative ramifications that have just been explained to Councilmember Rennie, and it may have very negative ramifications to our North 40 area. And as with regard to any specific developers, what that specific developer may or may not have, that is not what is before us this evening.
I'm going to jump in and make a comment, and then I want to move our discussion somewhere else, perhaps. I agree with Vice Mayor Spector. I think that the vision statement is broad and very general, and an unmet need is certainly an unidentified regional housing needs assessment per state law. So I think that we are obligated to comply with state law. We are just identifying our broad general goals in the vision statement. We are identifying residential unmet needs as one of those. I think by implication that has to include any kind of state law obligation that we have. So I would tend to agree with the vice mayor and not want to be specific in including that language. Any other discussion on that proposed addition? Councilwoman Sayoc.
Okay, given what I've heard, I'm prepared to table this thought and that added language for now, because there are parallel tracks of what's occurring with the housing element as well as what's happening here in the North 40. The reason why I put that out there, particularly today as we discuss this, is the vision statement, at least for this council member, has changed dramatically when I look at residential unmet needs from when we looked at it as a North 40 committee versus where we're looking at it now as we're looking at the town's total housing requirement. So I can understand that there's two parallel tracks, and we can see how those tracks intersect, if they even do. And so I just leave that for others to think about.
Other comments on the inclusion of the housing requirements language in the vision statement? Okay, so actually I have a discussion item about the vision statement. Again, on bullet number 3, or actually the entire thing. If you read it, the vision statement refers to throughout the town. It does not pick out a geographical area, and which is kind of interesting because when you look at the general plan with respect to the North 40, and there are land use elements, et cetera, that are called out in our staff report, it does, in conformance with what a lot of people have had to say to us, talk about serving the residents of the north side of Los Gatos. If I look at this vision statement, it does not say that. So number one, I think there's a conflict. And number two, I wonder if it makes sense to have something. I agree with looking at it vis-a-vis the entire town. So if I start with the first bullet and I say, it will look and feel like Los Gatos, that's inclusive of the entire town. We'll embrace hillside views and open space. Everything in Los Gatos should do that. The North 40 will address the town's residential and commercial unmet needs, not the north side. And the North 40 will minimize or mitigate impacts on town infrastructure and community services. So I have trouble with the fact that a lot of the testimony has been focused on what's good for the north side, because I don't see that in this vision statement. I'm ready, willing, and able to listen to my fellow council members about why I should be looking at just the north side, given this vision statement, and why this vision statement is valid, but I'll just throw out that for discussion. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I should first say, a disclosure. I was one of the 2 people who wrote the vision statement and guiding principles, so I have a vested interest in it. That being said, during the entire time that the North 40 Advisory Committee was working on this specific plan, we had probably 1,000 issues, and very often we would circle back to the vision statement and guiding principles to answer it or to try and answer it. It really helped. I don't think that there is a disconnect between the wording unmet needs and the some people's focus on the north part of town, because you can say that the North 40 is supposed to meet the town's unmet needs. One might argue that a small target is an unmet need, and we should put it in the North 40, and it would address the entire town's unmet needs. That's consistent with the vision statement. Or one might say that we have no small restaurants way in the north part of town. And so you put small restaurants there because it meets the needs of the north part of town as opposed to the south part of town where we are now. So the vision statement addresses that along with the guiding principles. So I don't see a disconnect between the unmet needs, nor do I think it is just supposed to address the north part of town, but it could address the north part of town.
Any other comments on that notion? Councilman Rennie.
Okay, I'll go. I was just going to add that I think I agree with Vice Mayor Spector, but if you're concerned about the north part of town, I think we can look at the policies that follow sort of the next level down and make sure that that's added in there.
Okay, any other comments? Councilman Leonardis.
I concur with Vice Mayor Spector's comments. I think the interest from the north side of town, and primarily where it appears there is some separation or special attention being paid in all of our correspondence to that area, is because of their proximity. But the statement is all inclusive. It's all of Los Gatos, which includes the north side of town. So I don't look at any necessary changes to the vision statement language in that regard.
Any other discussion on that issue or any other issue with the vision statement? Okay, I'm going to summarize and again look for just a show of hands consensus. What I heard was that the council is fine with the vision statement, that we are tabling for now an addition of language regarding meeting housing requirements in bullet number 3, and that the vision statement is sufficiently general to include not only the needs of the north side of town, but other places in town as well. So is that what we are hearing and concluding? So just by consensus? All right. So now we'll move on to the very easy part. The mix of uses in our specific plan area. And I've asked for a chart to go up, which is, hopefully we can make that lots more visible. Maybe move it up a little so that the light's better. And that's table 2-2. It appears at page 2-10 of the specific plan. And what we're seeing, Mr. Paulson, maybe I'm going to ask you, just while you're up there, to summarize that for everyone, in case they can't see it.
Sure. So what the table shows, table 2-2, is that residential will have up to 364 units. Combination of office and/or hotel will have up to 250,000 square feet. And that commercial, excluding office and hotel, so other uses, retail, restaurants, specialty markets, personal service, entertainment, would have a maximum cap of 400,000 square feet.
Okay, so Mr. Paulson, just for purposes of our discussion, what I'm going to ask the council to do, if we can, and maybe we can't, so council members, please let me know, is to discuss those very, very broad numbers that are a distribution between commercial and housing without getting into more specifics. If people think that it's not useful to go this high up on our discussion, we could just move to a discussion of housing type and amount and then commercial square footage amount. So I'm looking to the council to see where do they think that the most productive discussion can happen. Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. Regarding the 364 units, to me, there should be some kind of limitations in the square footages in those units. For instance, you can have housing for the millennials, but what is the limitation on the sizes of those units? Is it 500 square feet? Is it 5,000 square feet times 364 units? So I think there needs to be a more deeper definition of square footages in reference to those 364 units.
Okay, so that might be more specific discussion of housing type and amount, and that appears at page 2-28, section 2.7.3. So if we want to take on housing first, there is the section in the proposed draft specific plan that deals with the number of units at the square footage. So Councilman Leonardis, do you want to speak more specifically about that or just put your comment out?
My comment is out there for discussion.
Okay. So does anyone have Vice Mayor Spector?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A question of staff, if I may. This provision that we're now looking at on page 2-28, is very general and does not really speak to Mr. Leonardis's questions. And I'm trying to remember, at some point in time in the evolution of the specific plan, did we have a chart that delineated the square footages with specificity?
So what I'd offer through the mayor is in the glossary, there is a conceptual hypothetical scenario, and so I'll put that up now.
Can you let us know, where, is that in our appendices or in the back?
That is in the specific plan on page 6-16.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Just for clarification, since we're going to this, which is actually does answer my question of where it is, remind me, the fact that we put it in the glossary, was that of significance in the sense of how important it was or how controlling it was to the specific plan?
I would look potentially to Councilmember Sayoc also, since she was involved in that conversation. This was originally, as I recall, in the specific plan, and so there was quite a bit of discussion about whether or not that should be maintained in the specific plan, and ultimately was moved to the glossary for a hypothetical scenario rather than a hard, fast rule.
Councilwoman Sayoc.
If I may, when we put it in the glossary, I'm going to take a large discussion on this. When we were looking at residential, there was significant debate over, one, whether residential should even be there, and two, the number. And because one of our guiding principles was to minimize the impact to school districts, our thought was, what type of residential unit would minimize the amount of children, the child load factor? And this was the compromise that was reached by our committee, that realistically, single-family homes, single detached family homes created the largest school load factor, so we eliminated that. And then we looked at the size of the units, saying that nothing larger than 2,000 would be included, which is why you see the townhouses and townhomes and row houses up to 1999. And we decided to put it in the glossary. I saw it as that was the limitation. By having it as defined in the glossary, it was clear to those that would then process the application, these were the criteria we were looking at.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. It doesn't really make any difference what I remember or don't remember, but my sense was that the advisory committee was having a challenge as to what size units we should have. And so we moved it to the glossary in order not to have to put it into the specific plan. But putting that aside, I actually, whether it's in the glossary, whether it's not, I think it is a very good methodology for us to begin addressing the, I think, important questions raised by Mr. Leonardis.
Councilman Rennie.
So I think the concern that we're trying to address is the student generation rate, and I have been thinking about this quite a bit and thinking, well, do we limit sizes below 1,000? If you recall, when we had open testimonies, there was a lady that spoke about millennials wanting certain sizes, and actually she was really talking about urban settings versus ours, which is not really an urban setting. So I did sort of ask some questions of Grosvenor and Summerhill when I met with them last about this. And I discovered it would be difficult to limit to certain sizes. Well, I mean, you could limit below 2,000, but I was thinking, limit how many units could be below 1,000, for example. And then they showed me some designs that they were planning where they had a 1,600 square foot unit where the way it was designed, there was no way you were going to put kids in there. So I came to the conclusion it's difficult to try to limit size to get the limit in the kids. It's also about design, and if we limit it too much, now you're also limiting the flexibility to create a nice product that if it's designed correctly, will not allow kids. Potentially, we may want to try to beef up our policy more around these areas versus setting minimum limits, or at least not set them too far down. Hopefully that's clear.
Good enough. Councilman, any other questions before I weigh in on it? Because I haven't. So when I look at 2.7.3, which is actually, I'm going to say, you don't have to put it up, Mr. Paulson, part of the specific plan, which refers to the number of residential units. It refers to gross square feet of various types of uses. And then in 2.7.3a, it says residential units shall range in size, et cetera, and it refers me back to the glossary that's here. So I'm just wondering, because it says shall, hasn't the draft specific plan already included these ranges? And why do we have it in a glossary?
I don't know the exact answer to that, I'll be honest, but I think as is represented here, this was a hypothetical example. If the term shall, and obviously it does reference back to this glossary definition, then this is something that could be done. It also allows for some ranges, and I know during the advisory committee conversation we had a lot of discussions about ranges and the challenges with ranges. So I believe even if you look here with these conceptual ranges of total gross floor area, the caps are the same as are in 2.7.3. I think the 300,000 or the 400,000 square feet and the 300,000 square feet for the various product types.
Councilwoman Sayak, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So I think it's a great discussion talking about the size, the design. I do agree that all those factors weigh heavily in developing the residential units that we're going to have, but I still maintain that the actual units are of more concern because each unit will generate a load factor to our traffic. And if you look at what is specifically happening in our community, regardless of the size of the unit ranges of the design, you will have families moving into our area specifically to have their children go into our school district. It's just, I think it's a common occurrence that we all know. And so I still maintain that the best way to look at this is by the actual units. So, and all these design parameters are great, but it's still the reality of what we're looking at when we're looking at whether or not this is the maximum allowed.
Okay, before I call on Vice Mayor Spector, I just want to ask Mr. Paulson again. So I could read 2.7.3 residential units A as residential units shall range in size, just as a generalized factual statement. They shall range in size. And for example, they could be the chart that we're looking at here. I'm thinking that that's probably what the concept was. And if I understand Councilwoman Sayak correctly, I don't think that we had gotten to that discussion, but if you were talking about the number of units to be allowed, like 364 or some other number, then I agree with Councilwoman Sayak, not only for school impacts, but for traffic impacts and other impacts, reducing the number of units, to me, is a way to achieve that. Not only the number of units, but potentially the size. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I agree that I personally agree, and the advisory committee agreed that you can say it isn't just the millennials who were our target group for housing. It was also seniors. In fact, seniors were our fastest growing and largest growing community of residents. So we were looking at those two groups. We were mindful of the fact that you can't put limitations. Generally, you can't put limitations on whether or not a family lives there or a single guy or a senior family. But circling back to what the mayor and Ms. Sayoc were saying, if we want to start at the 30,000-foot level on housing, it would be to examine the total number of homes and whether or not we want it to be, 364 or not.
The comments. Councilman Rennie.
Let me go the opposite direction. I was actually thinking that we want to incentivize senior units, and I was going to propose something to the effect, maybe this starts with a question for staff, but I don't think we can limit something to a certain age in our specific plan. Is that correct? That only the developer can do that, but we can't put age limit in our specific plan?
No, we can designate senior housing in our plan.
Okay. So I was under the impression we could not, but so that was part of my thought anyway. So let me continue. So my proposal was something like, what if, we put a carrot in there that if you build 60 senior homes, which is what's already planned at 500 square feet by Eden, then you could allow a bonus, you can pick a different number. I said a round number of 100 senior units at 500 square feet per unit above the 364, and my reasoning is the general plan already allows somewhere around 500 and some number of units. Senior housing generates much less traffic, and it's likely to not generate it during the peak periods. It goes after one of our growing unmet needs. By 2030, 1 in 4 people in the county will be over 65. So to me, I'm actually thinking an incentive that would add more units versus reduce units. So I want to put that on the table before we got too far down the reduce unit side.
Okay. No, we haven't reached any decisions on this yet. We're still just making comments and asking questions. So I have a question. Where did the 364 units come from?
That was a number that was, through the mayor, that was a number that was come up with at a North 40 Advisory Committee meeting, and that was the number that has been in there since.
Come up with by who? The developer? A staff person?
It was a member of the committee, as I recall.
And was there any data, evidence, anything surrounding the 364, or was it random?
I do not recall any data to support the decision.
Okay. Vice Mayor Spector.
A question of staff. Did that come from the general plan? Because I don't remember the genesis of that number.
No, that was in the North 40 Advisory Committee meetings.
Councilwoman Sayoc.
So I was a committee member, and I don't remember that or who proposed that. But to be fair, though, the general plan, when we first began this process, had, I believe, up to 750 units that was being looked at. And it was slowly whittled down. I don't remember exactly how it got to 364. I don't believe it was actually by any one person, because we did do things by consensus. But just so that those in the audience understand, it was a process where there were actually higher numbers that were being looked at.
Councilman Linares.
Thank you, Mayor. So the specific categories of units, for instance, cottage cluster detached, it shows 30 or 40 to 50 units, the breakdown of each and every type of unit. Where did those numbers come from? How did that mix get allocated?
I think those were numbers that, given the potential product types that we were looking at, that our consultant at the time, RRM, or who's still our consultant, I think that was work with staff and our consultant to come up with some parameters around that.
Thank you.
So let me see if I can give us a little bit of direction and start with just the concept of the number of units. Councilman Rennie has indicated that he thinks there should be incentivized for certain types of units to go over 364. Had some comments that people might think that 364 is something that should be worked with, if you will, by the council. So let me just see if we can do a discussion around that, leaving aside the chart that's up on the board right now around the idea of 364 units and see where we go. If anyone has any comments on that. Councilwoman Sayoc.
Okay, a couple of thoughts to that. One is, the reality is we're looking at not only traffic generation rates, but we're looking at school load factor rates. And what's great is that there is an ongoing process right now where potential developers are working with the school district to look at what exactly will happen if this is developed. And a demographic study was just created, and it looks at the different housing types and what types, how many children we can expect to be generated. I know that discussion is ongoing, and I would hate for us to finalize any number until we have more input from the school district on how that conversation is going and what, in their opinion, is the best way to mitigate the school impacts.
Councilman Leonardis.
I would say the number we should be focusing on 364 units or less, and perhaps an increased allocation of senior housing within that 364 units.
Councilman Rennie.
So if you recall the discussion we started about RENA numbers, I don't know if we completely killed that off, but if we consider trying to get more RENA numbers here, I mean, the thought process is if we don't go for RENA numbers here, we reduce the number of units. That may mean that we get below the 20 unit density. We can't get RENA numbers out of this. That means we've put housing here, and we still have to put another 617 or 19, whatever the number was, somewhere else in town. I still like the idea of thinking about getting RENA numbers here and eliminating AHOZ zones other places. And that would say to me, increase units. Again, I'm arguing for increased units, I guess, but increase units so we can actually reduce units other places, or at least make it less by right other places.
Vice Mayor Spector, do you have any input on this? Okay. So my input is it's very difficult to figure out where you go from a specific number that nobody can tell you where it came from, that we don't have any data that indicates why it's good, bad, or indifferent. I disagree with Councilwoman Sayoc that we should not do anything until we get more input from a specific party. I think we've gotten a whole lot of input, and that we need to do our best to come up with an idea of where we are going to attempt to mitigate impacts across the board, not just with the school district, but I mean, if we took the idea that we're now going to ask everyone, we would ask Campbell to not develop Dell, we would talk to Good Samaritan Hospital, we would talk to Caltrans. So it's our unfortunate burden to try to figure out how we're going to mitigate these impacts, and we've got to come up with something that is reasonable. It troubles me, just because this kind of thing troubles me, that there's no evidence upon which to base the 364 number. So I have to go back and say to myself, okay, how am I, do I as a decision maker come up with something that I think is reasonable to mitigate the impacts that we've all heard so much about, to include school impacts in looking at these residential numbers? Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that those of us up here on the council have to understand that the work done by the advisory committee and probably by the planning commission before us required us to make hundreds of decisions, and most of those decisions had to do with numbers. And as I tell my husband, when I get there and I have to make decisions on the North 40, sometimes I feel like I'm on a high dive. I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to jump in and hope that there's a lot of water, because I don't know. And so I don't know where we got the 364. I do know that it was a reduced number from where we started. I would imagine, based on everything else we did, that we all discussed these numbers. Do I know that 350 is better than 364 or 390 is better than 364? I don't. But we are going to have to come up with a number, and this says a maximum number. It doesn't say thou shalt build 364 residential units. So I am comfortable with us using 364 or some number in order to move on. I'm also comfortable with us designating a greater specific number for senior housing. I'm also comfortable with us designating the square footage as smaller so that it will accommodate seniors and millennials. But you're not going to get any perfect answer that, the light is going to come in and just tell you what this perfect number is.
I'm still waiting for that. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to throw something into the mix of not just the number of units, but I wonder, and maybe staff can weigh in on this for me, whether it's not necessarily appropriate to talk about number of units so much as it is appropriate to talk about total square footage as resulting in a limitation of units. Can anyone make a comment on how that would go backwards, if you will? So, for example, if the council were to say, we don't want 400,000, we want 300,000, is that a rational way of limiting the production of units without designating a number? Or, I mean, the plan was written the way it was for a reason, and I'm just trying to figure out if my interest is to reduce the density of this project to mitigate impacts that we've all heard about, and I want to reduce density of residential. And I hear the vice mayor saying that, yes, there's been many years, and I totally understand her point of view. But if I thought, based on everything I've read, heard, et cetera, that I think it's appropriate to reduce the density of what we're allowing, is the square footage a more appropriate way to do that than picking a number?
Through the mayor, density is the basis for the calculations. Even if you were to reduce the square footage, if you didn't reduce the number, you'd still have the same number of units. They may be in different categories, but I believe that the number of units is the way to help mitigate your concern or your potential concern of the density of the project. The square footage is really more an intensity question. So it's, the number in combination with the size. So density is the strict dwelling units to the acre for specific projects. And we've had conversations in the past on other projects where the technical density isn't really that high, but the perceived intensity is high because the units are large on small lots, for example.
So before I call on Councilwoman Sayek, I'm going to ask you just sort of a kind of a follow-up. Councilman Rennie said that senior housing produced less traffic. We've had environmental studies, traffic studies, et cetera, regarding traffic. I don't recall seeing anything broken down for senior housing. I know that senior housing can sometimes require less parking. It may produce less traffic, but I am not sure if there's any data to support that. Mr. Morley.
So on the screen are the ITE numbers for the various land uses. And those are the ADT rates on the far side, outlined by the type of units that we're discussing.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sayek.
Just to, in the hopes of moving this a little bit forward, without looking at specific units, the 364, I would be in favor of maintaining the 20 units per acre so that we can hopefully address some of our regional housing numbers allocation. But within that density, that differentiation between density and intensity, I would actually like to see the square footage of each unit decreased. I think it would address some of the senior housing, affordable housing, as well as millennial housing that we've discussed, that we're targeting. And I think there are other ways to help offset some of the traffic issues that we're looking at, as well as school load issues. If you look at the entire parcel and look at realistically where those units, where that acreage could be placed. So if you wanted to look at it strictly on a density level, I could support that.
Let me see if I can attempt to kind of summarize where there might be consensus. Yes. What I hear is that we have several council members, I think maybe 4 at this point, who are interested in potentially increasing the requirement for senior housing. And I'm looking around to see if I'm getting nods, and I am getting nods. Okay, yes, Vice Mayor Spector.
On that issue, increasing senior housing, I'm looking at 228, page 228. And maybe I'm looking in the wrong page, or maybe I'm not looking at enough pages, but I don't see where senior is defined in order to figure out what we're increasing. Am I missing something?
You're not. It's not called out.
All right, so then, in order to increase it, we would have to know what it is to increase.
I think the increase that is getting referred to, which shouldn't be, frankly, is the proposal, the upcoming proposal from a particular developer. So I think that if the council wanted to designate of the 364 units a number, for example, for senior housing set aside, I think we could change the specific plan to do that. Ms. Pravetti is nodding. Is that an option for us?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Councilman Rennie.
So I wanted to make a comment on that. And, you know, it's what you know is planned kind of biases you a little bit or helps you understand what could be, and then you need to write the words to get closer to that. So we know that they're proposing that Eden Housing will build affordable senior housing that are 500 square foot housing that is very affordable for seniors. If you just specify senior housing or you specify a size, it's not going to be the same kind of product that Eden is providing that's quite affordable. I just want to keep people to keep that in mind, and that's kind of why I wrote it as an incentive for affordable senior housing, add more affordable senior housing, you know, of that style.
I'm going to ask a question then to follow up with Ms. Pravetti. I'm assuming that if the council included some designated nation for senior housing, keeping in mind that this is a specific plan for the town, that an applicant could come in with affordable senior housing, market senior housing. Would the mix that Councilman Rennie is talking about be better addressed through a housing element designation or better addressed in a specific plan designation?
From my experience, I would recommend that if the council has a specific outcome that you're looking for, that you would actually put it in the specific plan so there would be clarity. And it is important to specify the product type. So if you're looking at affordable apartments, per the chart that's up on the wall on page 6-16, you know, apartments / affordable has been identified as a range of up to 750 square feet. So that's a very specific category, and if the council wished, you could define that as senior housing. The development community is very creative, so if you're not clear about which product goes with senior, they will make seniors work in cluster housing and in any other product. So if you care about that, you'll want to be as clear as possible in the specific plan.
Okay. Councilman Rennie, since you're kind of leading the charge on this, do you have a suggestion that you want the council to consider? Not that I want to put you on the spot or anything, but
well,
you could say no.
It didn't quite get bought last time. Let me just repeat it that, you know, I'm thinking make it an incentive that if you put a certain amount of affordable senior housing, and maybe we describe it a little more so it matches the Eden, because I think that's exactly what we want, 500 square foot affordable housing, then you get, you know, a certain number more affordable housing. I like to see it as an incentive. versus requirement. One thing I would be careful of is usually what happens is you put in affordable housing, but it's kind of subsidized by the other housing that goes there. So I would be careful saying, well, half of 364 have to be affordable housing, because now you may not make it economically feasible for a developer to put it in.
Comments? Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. Moving back to something that Vice Mayor Spector said about we're continue to discuss senior housing and amounts of senior housing, but how are we going to define what senior housing is? Councilmember Rennie mentioned Eden Housing will be developing a project for seniors. What are the stipulations? Is it one person 55 years or older in the house? Is that the way we define it? And do we define it that way across the whole development?
I don't recall a specific definition. I've seen 62 years of age and other limits in other contexts. I think it's important, while there is certainly a pending development application that might help us understand how the specific plan were to be applied, I just would like to remind the council that you're creating the policy that will be applied for future applications, so you can define it as you feel best to meet the needs of the town. And the town attorney may have additional advice on a definition.
Now, there's a couple different requirements under the fair housing sections, and I'd have to come back with you on the 62 and the 55. There's different requirements that apply to each, and we could look at those if that's the direction council's going in, and then come up with that language.
Councilwoman Sayak.
Through the mayor, I do have a question of staff. So whether the number's 364 or 300 or whatever other number, 20% of that has to be below market. Is that correct?
The specific plan, I think, as it currently reads, is a minimum of 20% should be affordable housing. I believe there's policy language to that effect. Additionally, the town code currently, for that number of units, if a project came in with 100 or more units, then the BMP requirement normally per town code is 20%.
At least 20%. Okay. So right now we're at 72.8. Could we specify that the affordable units be senior, or does it have to be open to all available through our BMP?
I would look to council for, fair housing law implications.
You can designate in your specific plan an area and number of units that you want to be senior housing.
Okay.
That's acceptable. And then we'd have to define, of course, what you mean by senior housing, and that's where I'd have to come back with those sections.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the town attorney, I just want to clarify, you said you have to designate an area, and did you mean a physical area? I mean, just say, for example, we say we want 50% of the units to be senior, however you subsequently define it. We don't have to have them in an area, do we?
You could if you wanted to.
But we don't have to?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, in an attempt to get something out of this, I'm going to look to the members of the council and just ask the question, are people comfortable moving forward with the 364 unit number, the max? And if you're not, let me know. Councilman Leonardis.
You're calling it a max.
Calling it a max. Okay, so you're raising your hand. You are comfortable with it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I see Councilman Leonardis, Vice Mayor Spector are the two that are comfortable with that. Okay, so let's throw that out for a moment. Of those who are not comfortable with it, does anyone have an alternate number in mind? All right, I will throw out 300 just to start the discussion. And I know I'm going to get lots of anguished sighs about that, but I'll just throw it out to see if that's in an attempt to get a high, get a low, and get to where we can reach some kind of consensus. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I sort of feel like I'm playing poker, but I don't play poker. Anyway, I don't recall any magic to 364, and since it was a maximum, I was still okay with it. Is there a significance to the number 300 other than it's less than 364?
Frankly, nah. Frankly, it's less. And it's my experience is that if you write something that says maximum, I guarantee you, you will get that number. So I am trying to get to a number that at least I, as a decision maker, can feel comfortable with, saying that it was my best attempt to reach a mitigation for the various issues that have been called out to us on this project. So I haven't heard a good data point for 364, so I'm thinking my 300 is probably just as good. But I am actually looking for a reduction. I understand the argument that Mr. Rennie is making about hitting RENA numbers, and I understand the argument for affordable and for senior. And I do think that senior has a reduced traffic impact. I also think that certain small types of millennial housing, when combined with the right kind of uses around it, could also have a reduced traffic impact. So really what I am looking for in proposing that lower number is to look to the council for, are people wanting to reduce the square footage or the number of units in an attempt to mitigate some of the issues that have been raised, or are the members of the council comfortable with that number as a maximum and want to go forward with it? And so we have two that have said they're comfortable with that. Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. You know, this is difficult because we have the state saying we need these numbers and we have to meet these numbers. So in an attempt to try to help meet some of those numbers, you know, obviously units are nice in that regard. Of course, in an attempt to reduce traffic and all the other impacts that come with numbers, obviously you want less. So it's kind of a tug of war. If the amount of housing was reduced, what would go in its place? Would it be more commercial space? And what would the impact of that be? Would it be more open space? So we have those questions that could rear their heads coming soon, I suppose. It's just some random thoughts.
Councilwoman Sayak.
So for me, I'm going to give you my two largest factors for determining the residential units. One is, what can we allocate towards our regional housing numbers? I'm having a difficult time looking at this application just as the North 40 specific plan, and keep looking at what do we as a town have to look at in terms of housing. So if, whether it's 364 or 300, if we can allocate that so that it would satisfy our RENA, I would be comfortable. That requires a density at 20 units per acre. And so I guess I'd have to see how that would pencil out. The other concern for me is making sure that the load factor is distributed fairly throughout the 44 acres. And if you're looking at traffic, I don't believe that it makes sense to have all the housing in one specific part of that. And I'm also particularly concerned about, again, the school districts. You have 2 school districts, actually 4, and I think if you can offset it and have it equally so that both school districts have the benefit of absorbing whatever school factor load comes in, I think I would be comfortable.
Okay, let me see, make another stab at this. The specific plan area, am I correct, Mr. Paulson or whoever else, is it currently zoned 20 units per acre, or would the council have to take an action to zone it that way?
The zoning is not currently 20 dwelling units to the acre. There's a variety of zoning designations that were provided, I believe, today in a desk item. The past projects in the mixed-use commercial general plan designation have been allotted up to 20 dwelling units per acre, but there is no minimum 20 dwelling units per acre in the town currently.
And if you have that chart that we got in our desk item that's got the zoning on it, if you could put that up. And while you're doing that, Councilman Rennie.
Okay, sorry if I keep arguing my case, but a couple more facts. I did ask Grosvenor the question about how much retail they thought they were going to get on the site. And based on the size and the height limitations, they didn't think they were going to get 560 square feet of the various retail combinations on there. So that tells me if you reduce housing, you're making more room for them to get the rest of their 560 retail. And housing, I think we've learned before, is much less of a generator than retail. So I'm concerned that we're going the wrong way. And in, I guess I didn't put it as one of my reasons, but for adding senior housing, it generates a lot less traffic than half, as you saw, regular housing. But it's going to, if they go with the incentive and eat up more of the commercial space, you're actually going to reduce traffic even more.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I'll go address these backwards on my notes. Reducing housing does not necessarily increase commercial or retail. That will all be defined in the specific plan. I had a question of staff on the issue of spreading out the residential. I don't remember right now what we currently say about residential. I mean, do we say that it has to be X amount in a certain district, or do we have the ability to spread it out?
I don't believe there is any requirement currently in the specific plan to spread it out. There may be some policy language that offers that to be, recommendation. Can we spread it through? I believe the council, if that's their prerogative, can make that part of the specific plan.
Okay, and I would agree. Thank you. And then the last one on the 20 units per acre, if we want to avail ourselves of RENA bennies, how do we get 20 units per acre? Help me out here. On a 40-acre site, how could we use the North 40 for RENA and accommodate the 20 units per acre?
Well, I think there's a number of options. One would simply be if you have the plan currently says is up to 364 units. You potentially could say a minimum of 18.2 acres or a minimum number of acres that would accommodate 20 dwelling units per acre would be part of the specific plan.
All right, so we could do that. We could say rather than 40, you're going to have a smaller amount. So then when you put the units there, you get the correct number. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so just to respond to Vice Mayor Spector, on pages 2-3 and 2-4 of the draft specific plan describes and calls out the proposed districts, the Lark District, the Transition District, and the Northern District. All of them have residential designated in them, with the exception that the Northern District has a particular kind. It says residential paren above commercial close paren, including condominiums, live, work, flats, etc. So I'm not sure that I agree with the Northern District designation of above commercial. However, right now there's residential that's per the specific plan allowed in each of those districts. So I think we understand where the various positions are. Let's see if we can get to something. We're not going to go through and edit this thing tonight, clearly. What we're going to do is hopefully reach some consensus motions, which I've been trying to do, and ask the staff to come back to us with those, obviously, at a future meeting, I would think, at this point, unfortunately. I never give up hope. Do we have a consensus for, well, let me call on the Vice Mayor first. Maybe she's got an idea.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given what you just said, I think that you can move forward on this. You can see if you have a consensus on your 300 maximum or some number, but right now that's at play. You can request or suggest a 20 units per acre to be on a limited number of acres so that it gets you the RENA provisions, and you can have that distributed throughout the property rather than in a limited amount of property. So if you want to, go that direction, I think you have enough information from staff to do that.
Thank you. I'm going to drop my 300 because I think it's going nowhere. Is there consensus on the notion of designating a particular number of acres at the 20 units per dwelling acre section? I'm getting nods. Let's see if we get hands. Hands from everyone but Councilman Leonardis. And Councilman Leonardis, do you want to tell us, convince us why we're wrong on that? What your position is?
I think if it's just, we're working with a specific plan that could be determined later when the design comes through. So I don't know if, maybe I don't fully understand it, but I would just leave that flexibility out there for the developer.
Okay, so I think we have 4-to-1 consensus to designate a particular number of acres for 20 units per dwelling acre. Before I get into a discussion of what that number should be, let's go to the question of distribution of residential across the plan area. Is there consensus that there should be a distribution of residential across the plan area, independent of the not code sections, these specific plan sections with respect to the districts that I just talked about? Vice Mayor Spector. Oh, you're raising your hand, yes. Are there any other yeses? Oh.
I'm not sure I understand what you're proposing.
The question is, independent of what kind of residential it is, the question on the table is, are you or are you not in favor of distributing the residential throughout the plan area, as opposed to limiting it to a particular district or location?
So I thought that we squeezed it all into the Lark District on the theory that that's really fits with the residential that's already in town, and as you move towards the highway, as you move up towards 85, you're now up in an area that's really 85 and 17, and that's less appropriate for people to live in. So, that seems to me that the housing is squeezed that way for that reason. I know we are allowing some above commercial in the northern district, but I don't think really any's planned. So I guess I'm on the fence on your question.
Okay, I'm just going to refer you back to the plan language, the transition, and remember, again, focusing on the specific plan. The transition district allows residential. The Lark District allows residential, and the Northern District allows residential. So the way the plan is written now, residential is allowed throughout the plan. So do you have any objection to that, I guess is what I'm asking.
It's sort of contradictory to trying to get it together in 20 units per acre, though, if it gets spread out.
Well, then I think that I'm going to confirm, hopefully, with Mr. Schultz or Ms. Privetti, that whatever acres are designated in the specific plan, if the council so chose, could put those acres where it wanted. It wouldn't have to all be in one single spot. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So I'll say yes, you can spread it throughout to make it easy.
There you go. I'm going to keep beating you down. No, it's fine. You don't have to agree. We could just do 4-to-1. Vice Mayor Spector.
Actually, that's what I was going to say. If we want 20 units per acre, then we know we have to designate X amount of acres in order to get that number, because if we spread it over 40, it won't work. And so that number is just a mathematical calculation. So you come up with a mathematical calculation and you spread it throughout the property.
Okay, so we have a consensus on 20 units per acre zoning for a particular number of acres, which could be 1 spot, 2 spots, 3 spots, multiple spots within the specific plan area. And we have consensus on distributing it throughout the specific plan area. What we don't have is how many acres, or I'm going to go back again to the number of units. And if I focus on it, given what we've just done as a maximum, is there a consensus on a maximum of the 364 units, which is now contained in the plan at 2.7.3? Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. Again, I think a 364 would be a good maximum. It's a number that came from somewhere. It's a number that has been used for a number of years. I think it's been used for so long that we're forgetting the origin of it. It seems reasonable. So I would say the word maximum is clearly the word maximum. It can be less. And based on the conversation about 20 units per acre and the amount of acres that can have 20 units on them, it can add up pretty quick to just a few acres of housing if they're all going to have 20 units per acre on them. So we'll leave it at the 364 max and down.
Okay, other comments on that maximum unit number? Councilwoman Sayek's pondering.
I'm stuck on the word maximum. I think I would be comfortable with a 364 maximum if it goes towards all our regional housing needs numbers, so that so that we don't have to look at alternate sites like the Los Gatos Lodge, for example, and if it were distributed equitably throughout the parcel so that it wouldn't be a burden just to one particular school district.
Okay, I agree with what Councilwoman Sayek just said. In some respects, what worries me is that if there is a designation that the 364 goes to regional housing needs, doesn't it then get a density bonus on top, and it's developed by right, and it has to all be affordable with a 35% bonus, correct?
That's correct, but again, we have evidence that there are other product types that still are 20 units to the acre that also can be developed at a market rate price. So for purposes of RHNA, if you want to meet the 20 units per acre, that could certainly satisfy our RHNA needs.
So I'm going to go back, and then I'll call on the Vice Mayor. On the regional housing needs assessment, as I understand it, the state case law or developed law is that the state presumes that if a parcel is zoned 20 units per acre, that it's going to develop at 20 units, and those units can be counted without anything more, without a designation, without anything else besides the zoning, as a regional housing needs parcel, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Vice Mayor Spector.
That's what I was going to say. But I was also going to say that trying to address Councilmember Sayek's concerns, the 20 units per acre will, by definition, can, by definition, count toward the RHNA obligation. It can be, we can say in the specific plan that it's spread out throughout the 40 acres from north to south. And then we get back to the 364, and I agree with Councilmember Leonardis. It's survived the test of time, even though I don't know where it came from.
That may not be a good thing, but Councilman Rennie.
So I'm a little concerned about spreading them out. I guess I agree with the idea of getting some out of the LGUSD school district. My concern is, again, the appropriateness for sticking them up in the Northern District, because I know, we haven't talked about retail yet, but the unmet needs that we're targeting there, I believe, I would argue for, are things more like general merchandising, which we don't have in the town. We want to create a different kind of shopping experience in the Northern District than we have in downtown. So to me, that means, let me just pick some, we might end up with an REI and a Target or something up there, or something of that sort. So now I'm imagining, what a Target and a Target parking lot looks like and an REI looks like, and now I mix in some housing with that, and it doesn't sound very appealing to me. So, and I know that their current plan is not to put any houses up there, even though we're allowing it, because they're planning, basically a synergistic retail for there, where you have 2-3 anchors like the ones I've described, and then some other small ones. How aesthetically can you fit housing into that?
Well, so again, what I'm going to do to try to focus our discussion is to say that the draft specific plan currently does allow housing in each of the districts, and that if we wanted to go away from that, we'd actually have to change it. So, and again, the plan being the big picture, and then the developer to come in under that plan. Councilman Rennie.
So I'm okay with the flexibility. I'm worried about adding more limitations that, again, forces the housing to be where it doesn't really work.
Okay, so we haven't talked about any kind of language with respect to distributing the housing beyond what we already have in our plan, which is allowing it in each of the districts. So what I'm hearing the consensus is that we're going to designate a certain number of acres as 20 units per acre, that we are wanting as a consensus to spread that residential across the parcel, or parcels, I should say, which is currently allowed under the draft specific plan. So I'm kind of going to look for nods to see if I've summarized where we are. Now, before I go to where those acres might be, I'd like to go to the discussion of designating a portion of those maximum units to affordable, we already have 20%, or to, in particular, senior. So are there proposals on a number or percentage or some other way to designate a goal, if you will, for senior housing? So, Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I just want to, emphasize we're looking at 20% BMP. So if we had 364 units, 60-something, 72, would be BMP. So we would have that if we had 364 units, and I don't think we have verbalized the consensus on that. So now we're looking at, of the remainder, this is a question of the staff and of the mayor. We're looking at, of the remainder, what number or what percentage or what size do we want to designate as senior? Is that where we are?
That's what I'm asking, yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So any ideas on that? Councilman Leonardis.
I think we should probably take a look at our current population and see who actually fits in those categories now and how we're currently distributed, and then consider distributing it the same way, potentially, based on our demographics, not necessarily our current housing, obviously, because we're looking to add senior housing.
Okay. Before I call on the Vice Mayor, Mr. Paulson, can I ask you to put up that glossary chart again? Okay. So when I look at that breakdown of the type, size, et cetera, of housing, would it make sense for the council to consider adding a box, if you will, to that chart that's senior housing? That would be described in some fashion. Ms. Pravetti was talking about apartments affordable, but could there be, maybe it doesn't fit there because it's talking about a, quote, product type, unquote, a term that I don't like, by the way. But could there be a box that were for senior housing? Does that make any sense?
There certainly could be. What I would offer is that that box that Ms. Pervetti mentioned earlier, the apartments affordable in that size range, the senior product type would fit into that, as I think has been currently stated. So I don't think there's anything precluding the council from adding a box, but I think that type of unit really is encompassed in this chart currently.
Before we move on, Ms. Pervetti, would then, if it's encompassed in the chart, would then the council, if it wanted to put in senior housing specifically, put that into what's now our proposed draft 2.7.3, where we're talking about units and square footage?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and you could do it in both places. Add the word senior affordable, if that's the will of the council, to be very clear, and then also reinforce it in the policy section 2.7.3.
Okay, Vice Mayor Spector, you had your hand up.
All right, I get the senior affordable. Well, maybe I don't. Senior affordable, do we, assuming that we actually call that out on a chart or on a, do we have to, is there some kind of legal terminology or size that we have to give that type?
Again, I would defer to our town attorney regarding the legal implications, but based on the discussion that we've been having this evening and the desire to provide and ensure smaller units for a particular demographic, that meets the row that's already in this table regarding apartment/affordable.
All right, so we could call that senior affordable. Now, beside the senior affordable in that line item, can we also have a senior, or is that where we get into the problematic area?
A different type of housing for seniors, if I'm understanding correctly?
Yes, I understand that the smaller units, low-income senior, I understand that concept. Can we also now attribute a certain amount of the units to senior and not violate any legal prohibitions?
I believe you can. I think the question is whether you want it to be senior and affordable, because there are a lot of other types of housing that are now being offered in terms of assisted living or continuum of care. So there are other choices in the marketplace, and if it's the will of the council, you could also be specific regarding that.
Madam Mayor, may I just one more? What I'm looking for, is there a way to say, let's put aside the affordable, a place where we designate for seniors and it's not also affordable, it's just a place where seniors can live and it's designated for them? Can we do that?
You can, and again, I would defer to our town attorney, because once we start calling, let's say, for example, it's a cottage type of housing, someone could say, oh, it's going to be for seniors. There are a fair number of requirements. How do we make sure that that's going to be for a senior when a family or another type of household could easily move into that as well? So
that's the question.
Yes.
Okay, before I go to other comments, Mr. Paulson, can I get you to put 2.7.3, the language, up there on the board? Okay, so members of the council and Ms. Pervetti, if I look at paragraph B, could the council put a bullet under B, because B is telling us the maximum number of units, and put a bullet under there that says X number of senior units?
Yes.
And then, okay. Other comments or questions? Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. Going back to the previous discussion about different types of housing, and specifically senior affordable or just regular senior housing, I think the senior population should be allowed to choose among the chart of the different categories of housing, whatever housing they like. For instance, they might decide to pick it looked like 2,300 square foot townhome. That might suit their needs, or they might decide that they want the 500 square foot apartment. That might suit their needs. I think what will really define is an allocation in terms of a percentage across all housing types. So I would just say we take the 364 units and we say it doesn't matter which units in particular they are, but 35% of them could be allocated to people who are 55 years and older, or one household member that's 55 years or older. I would think something like that based on our existing population numbers. We know how many people in town roughly are of that age. Would be very useful as a guide to try to determine what kind of numbers we could look at in this category, in those categories.
Councilman Rennie.
A couple comments. I'll remind one of the comments I made earlier that I think it's the California Department of Finance says that we will have 25% of our population by 2030 will be over 65. So we know that we're moving in that direction. We're going to get a lot more seniors than we're allocating the percentage for. And so that's one comment. My second comment was, if we put a limitation to seniors, I would prefer us use 62 and not 55. I think 55 is still going to draw kids into the school districts, which is one of the things we're trying to achieve with senior housing. When I think of senior housing, I'm really thinking of much older seniors that want to move into more of a move down kind of situation, or a small unit. I'm turned 50 today, and I don't feel like I'm going to be senior in 5 years.
Happy birthday. This is how you want to spend it, right? I have a follow-up question for Mr. Schultz, and a comment. Mr. Schultz, Councilman Leonardis was suggesting that a percentage across housing types could be just designated for seniors. Is that legal?
I don't believe so. I've got to look into the exemptions that you do have under the Fair Housing Act. And so there is the ability in your specific plan to designate an area for senior housing. If that's where we're heading with it, then we're going to have to do more research in exactly how we can implement that and make the correct findings and have the exemption under the Fair Housing Act.
Thank you. Just to comment on Councilman Leonardis's suggestion that seniors could pick the type of housing they wanted to move into. Obviously, people can pick the type of housing to the extent they can afford it that they want to move into. But one of the reasons that I would support a set aside for senior housing is based upon the chart that went up, that the senior housing produces less traffic, that the senior housing has a lower parking requirement, that the senior housing could maintain impacts in a particular community, including school impacts. So I would not be comfortable with just saying we have lots of different kinds of housing types and seniors can live in them, because the benefits that I see to senior housing we would not get if we took that approach. So I couldn't support it. Councilman Leonardis.
My intention would be that it would be restricted still. You just take a percentage. If it's 25%, if it's 35% of the housing, the total of the housing, and the total among all the units, that those particular units, say a certain amount of townhomes would be restricted, age restricted, a certain amount of apartments would be restricted. It wouldn't be just like, okay, here they are. If you're a senior, move in, great. If you're not a senior, you know, you can move in anyway. So that's where I was getting at. It would offer not just the 500 square foot apartments for seniors, but it would offer more housing choices for the seniors. But it would be geared towards the seniors having a choice of housing, and it wouldn't be open to everybody. There's a certain amount of units within each category would be senior only.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I think we've been down this road in the North 40 Advisory Committee, and we probably are going to need for our town attorney to come back to us, because I know we can do the Eden type of senior affordable and designate that. Once we get past that into seniors generically, I believe it's more problematic, but maybe I'm wrong, and we need Mr. Schultz to weigh in.
Okay, let me make this suggestion, or see if we can wrap up this discussion. Is there consensus among the council members that there should be what I'm going to call a set aside for senior housing, whether that be a number of units or a percentage of units? Is there consensus with the council? Okay, so there is. Does the council generally, with the consensus, agree with Vice Mayor Spector that in order to determine what that number or percentage should be, that we need more information from the town attorney with respect to how those units can be designated? So I'm seeing yes. And I'm going to add another question for the council to ask Ms. Pravetti, to the extent that the council decides to designate a certain number of units as senior, what effect would that have on any kind of regional housing needs assessment or affordability assessment for purposes of our housing element? If we could, would people like that information as well? So I'm going to get hopefully a yes. Okay, so I hope that somebody's keeping track of these fabulous consensus motions that we're making here. So I think that where we are is we have, oh, and we would also, I'm going to see if we can get a consensus on, and I'm not sure the proper way to determine this, and so maybe staff can help us out, figuring out, based upon the information that we get from Mr. Schultz and Ms. Pravetti, how many acres the council should be looking at as designated for this 20 dwelling units per acre, not just for senior, but for affordable housing. So is that something that people would find helpful? Okay, I'm getting nods. Yes.
I guess I have kind of a question on that, because I'm thinking about the design that's there now, and I know that maybe I just haven't thought all the way through, but I'm concerned that the design so I know the design that is there, I've been told, is already 20 units per acre, but it's also got a lot of interspersed open space through it. So I'd be careful saying you got to stuff it in a small amount, then you don't have any interlaced open space in there. I haven't thought all the way through what the implications are, but I want to be careful there.
Okay, so I will say stay tuned, because if you look at your handy outline, we are going to get to maybe density intensity, which is going to include open space designations and discussion regarding those issues. So I think that we'll stay with the big picture and then move to those questions. So have we gotten to the point where if we look at the outline that I gave people, was to discuss the housing type and amount, should there be a specific mix, should there be any affordability designations or age limitations? I think we have discussed that, and maybe we can put a check by that and take a break and then move to commercial square footage. So I think we'll do that, and we'll take a break for about 10 minutes. of your patience with us. I know this is a painstaking process. We'll see if we can move it a little faster, but I think it's really important to make sure that all the council people get their opinions on all these questions out there and that we have a productive discussion. So apologize for the length, but we'll try to make some progress. Okay, so our next discussion item is going to be commercial square footage, because just why not? And Mr. Paulson, for this purpose, I'm going to ask you to put up, if you have got it, the table from the May 2013 draft specific plan, the 2.7 table. And ladies and gentlemen, the council and the audience, if you have a book, we're looking at 2.6.7, page 2-26. And the point for us to consider is how much, I've got the, I'm sorry, it's, I got the wrong page. 2.6.7. Right, on 226, 2.6.7 retail tenant space, which is essentially talking about commercial uses. We also have our which we can't all put up at the same time, unfortunately. Table 2-2. Maybe I'll have you go back to that, and then we'll go to the Table 2-2 has got on it a maximum of commercial square footage. It has a listing of different uses, and it does not break down the overall commercial use into unit sizes. And that table 2.-2 is on page 2-10. And so if everybody could take a look at that for a second. And then, Mr. Paulson, if you could put the other table up again. And this table actually is breaking down sizes of commercial uses within that commercial number of the 400,000 square feet. So what I'm going to ask council to do is first to look at the 400,000 square feet, determine whether or not the council thinks that that is appropriate. And then when and if the council does that, should there be a specific mix of commercial types and uses, or should there be any limitations to units of any particular size? And that's why I put this table up, which was discussed at the advisory committee, but then not put into the specific plan. So for those of you who are on the advisory committee, maybe if you could, when we get to that discussion, tell us something about that. So first, let me open the discussion about the generalized 400,000 square foot number for commercial use. Comments on that? Anyone? Councilman Leonardis.
This is a question for staff. How does that number compare with the total square footage of our downtown? All the retail in the downtown business district.
So I turned to Ms. Wren for the retail. Staff pulled data from the county assessor's records, and so the total of our C2 zoned parcels, which is our central business district, is around 1.1 million square feet. Now that includes everything. That's not just retail. So if Ms. Wren has any additional information on strictly retail.
Monica Wren, Economic Vitality Coordinator. Recently we went through the records to try to get an accurate count of just retail restaurant first floor uses in the downtown, and we came up with about 800,000 square feet.
Thank you.
Ms. Wren, can I ask you, did you break that down in any fashion into 2,000 square foot unit, 5,000 square foot unit, et cetera?
We broke it mostly down by use, and And I can tell you most of the things downtown range from about 1,100 square feet to about 2,500 square feet. That's really where the bulk of the floor plate sizes are. Of course, there's a few larger restaurants and larger store sizes.
Okay, other questions or comments just on the 400,000 square foot number? Councilwoman Sayak.
Actually, if I could just get clarification, it's 800,000 square feet?
Yes.
And are we defining, so it's from Main Street to Highway 9?
So the C2 district is all of North Santa Cruz from Highway 9 to 17 basically, and then Main Street from like Linden Plaza all the way to where the former Yarn Dogs was. And then there's University as well that goes all the way to Highway 9.
Okay.
And those streets in between Elm, all of those are all C2.
Okay, thank you.
Did you break it down at all for North Santa Cruz Avenue, what people traditionally think of as downtown?
No, we didn't. I could probably get that information for you in just a minute. I just have to add it up. I do have it by the streets.
Okay. Councilman Rennie.
I can just remind you, we got a report from, I think it was a San Jose professor. In that report, they listed what's currently in the downtown by sizes, and then restaurant, non-formula, formula, and personal service by percentages. It's on page 4 of that report.
Thank you. I don't see a whole lot of discussion on the 400,000 square foot number. Do we need more information before we can make any kind of consensus determination on that? Councilman Rennie.
So I'll go ahead and make a comment. I did, again, ask Grosvenor about what was sort of the minimum size, and I think there's already, we have 400,000 square feet, but I think there's already about 66,000 that's existing now. And so when I talked to Grosvenor, I got the feeling from him that he couldn't go much lower without losing sort of the synergy that he wanted to build with his medium box retailer kind of anchors and then adding to that. So while I'm talking, I'll go ahead and comment. Also on this slide is Grosvenor did request that we allow some mechanism to go over the 50,000 square feet. And so I asked a little bit, well, you know, what does that allow? And for example, a Safeway typically is about 55,000 square feet, so a typical Safeway would not fit under that. He suggested, you know, make it a CUP. I know we had comments, I think, from Lee Katana saying, well, you know, how do you use CUP for the size of something? So maybe that's not the right mechanism, but maybe we want to consider something there.
Other comments? Mr. Paulson, did you have a slide of the actual language at 2.6.7 by any chance? I may not have asked for that. In any event, if you don't have it, that's fine. The only limitation that it's putting on sizes within that 400,000 square feet is a maximum individual commercial retail tenant size of 50,000 square feet. That's what's currently in the plan. So if the council wanted to change that or break down sizes, it would need to change the plan to do that. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do know a problem that the advisory committee had on this issue, and we struggled with this a lot, is what square footage and how many stores. And in doing that analysis, we were examining the typical size of restaurants, the typical size of retail in the downtown, with an objective of not, quote unquote, competing. And I think Councilmember Sayak may remember better, but we weren't able to come to any conclusion, which is probably why Table 2-7 in the May draft of the specific plan is not in our current draft. I think my thinking right now is that we should have something other than the maximum size being 50,000, but what that magic number or numbers is, I don't know.
Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. We can try the approach that we used before with the housing. We can say, choose a number and say that's the maximum or less. And in order to allow some flexibility in that number, maybe we can select 80,000 or less. I don't know if that's going to get boos from the audience or not, but I'm going to try it.
Let's see if you get boos from up here. I don't know. Comments on that suggestion? Vice Mayor Spector.
My comment is a question. Can you, Mayor, repeat or summarize what was the concept there?
Sure. So I thought, being that 50,000 could be exceeded and we want to have more flexibility, we could select a number like, I just threw out 80,000. 80,000 or less, have it be the maximum.
So, as I'm understanding Councilman Leonardis, he's suggesting that the language that we currently have in our specific plan where we limit to 50,000 be 80,000. My comment on that is that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with 400,000 to start with. And I think that we should break down sizes into something that looks like what was proposed at the advisory committee. And I'd be curious for those who remember or were on the advisory committee where the percentages came from. And I'd also say with the 400,000 square feet, it actually, unlike the 364, I think it actually had a genesis where the EIR was listing a 580,000 square foot max for traffic purposes. We had existing commercial already on the specific plan zone. So the 400,000 is actually new commercial, and it can't be more than that or more than a certain percentage at build out. And I thought that was from EIR numbers. Is that correct, staff?
I believe the 560 actually is in the current general plan, so that's where that number started. And so backtracking out from there with the potential for some office and or hotel, the 400 was where we landed for the additional commercial.
Okay, so now that I'm looking at the table 2.2, I see it says projects cannot exceed the maximum traffic capacity evaluated under the EIR, which is where I got EIR, and so that was the 580.
Yes, which just happens to be the same number that was in the general plan.
Okay. So I'm looking for comments on Councilman Leonardis' proposal to just change the language of the general plan to 80,000, or I'm looking for comments on the concept of limiting commercial sizes further as by the chart we've got up here. Councilman Leonardis.
I'm also looking at the lower end of the chart, the 0 to 1,500 square feet, 5% of the total of 400, projected of 400,000. I know that's not agreed to yet. I guess that could be as many as, what, 20 units or something, if my math is correct, at 1,000 square feet. Does anybody have a calculator? So that seems as if it would compete with our downtown more. I would be more inclined to move those percentages towards the 3,000 to 10,000 square foot level. I understand that there will be a need for some smaller square footages. I mean, it's inevitable that not everybody's going to be able to operate in a minimum floor plate of 3,000 square feet, but I think we should try to really minimize those lower square footages, reduce those percentages, and increase the larger percentages.
Councilman Rennie.
So let me try to remind us about, again, the report from the professor from San Jose last time. Sorry, I can't remember people's names very well. If you recall, he had 5 different scenarios where he varied different sizes, and I asked a lot of questions, as I usually do of him. And his minimum size that he was using was 5,000 square feet, and I asked about 3,000 and so forth. And he claimed that below 5,000 square feet, it's really not going to make a difference. And then sort of related to this, what we're really trying to do is create a different kind of shopping experience from downtown, which means discouraging the small non-formula retail. Formula retail is going to tend to be larger anyway. And in his scenario 3, which he's starting to say is tipping towards downtown staying more competitive, he has 75% allowance for retail, non-formula retail under 5,000 square feet. And he's claiming downtown is going to be, you know, if we believe him, downtown is going to be more competitive in that particular scenario. So I thought through this and I was thinking, you know, I don't know if we want to go to just non-formula retail or retail in general, but I was going to propose maximum of 30% below 5,000 square feet and keep it simple and stop there based on all the information he gave us that kind of said it really didn't matter. Try to keep it simple.
Okay, so if I could just give some historical perspective from the North 40 Committee. The reason why the table's not in here, the table that we keep referring to, is the North 40 could not come to any agreement on floor plate size. Because if you look at it holistically, it's not just the floor plate, it's the type of retail, it's the, I mean, there were so many factors that were going into, and that's why we couldn't come to agreement, and ultimately why the request for the urban decay analysis, hoping that that would be able to provide some information that would more accurately describe what would be directly competing with downtown. Now, I keep going back to what's considered neighborhood serving, and we had this discussion as well. If we're looking at, and one, we haven't defined what exactly is this retail going to be. Is it neighborhood serving, or is it going to be this destination shopping center? If it's neighborhood serving, you need small square footage for the local coffee shop, for the dry cleaner, for certain things that residents in the northern area would like to walk to. And so my concern is if you start eliminating the small pads, you eliminate those neighborhood serving businesses that the northern section of Los Gatos has clearly said they need, they want, and they should be able to walk to. So I don't know if it's, you know, the approach of looking at percentages, or if you look at, I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways to look at it. And I don't necessarily know what the right thing is. I was hoping the economist had the magic answer. He gave us 5 different scenarios. Perhaps we pull together economists that can actually look at that and make specific recommendations. I don't know, but tonight I don't think I have the expertise to answer that question.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A lot of issues. First of all, starting with increasing the 50,000 to 80,000. I'm not prepared to do that right now because I don't know the logic of it. And so, you know, maybe 50,000 is as good as 80,000, maybe 80,000 is better, but I'm not prepared to make that jump of a number. Neither am I prepared to say that I would never do it, but right now I'm not prepared to do that. Secondly, with regard to the square footage of 0 to 3,000, 0 to 1,500, and 0 to 3,000, I agree with, excuse me, Councilwoman Sayoc. The reason this is in the back is or is not here anymore is because we didn't know what to do with it. But we will need some small square footage sites on the North 40 at a minimum to serve the people who are living there. Do I know whether this percentage that we have in this 2.7 is the right percentage? No, but it was as good as the North 40 Advisory Committee could do at that time.
Councilman Rennie, help me out. I believe that your proposal was not to break it down as per the chart that we have up here now, but to propose a maximum 30% below 5,000 square feet. Was that your proposal?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me go back up to the 400,000 square foot figure. And again, asking everyone to keep in mind that it's a plan, not an application. Is there a consensus that we're comfortable with that square footage, given the EIR information we've had, forgetting for a second commercial ramifications, economic ramifications, but traffic, what you're serving, et cetera? Are people comfortable with the 400,000 square foot designation? Councilman Rennie is saying yes. Maximum, sorry. Vice Mayor Spector, you're okay? Okay, so we have a consensus that
question
we're, oh, yes.
for staff. Is there a real-world comparison with the 400,000? Obviously, we try to compare it to our downtown, which is 800,000. What is the, a local mall or shopping area that is 400,000 square feet? Is there something like that that we're aware of? Like Santana Row, what's the square footage of that?
So I roughly just did the calculation of just North Santa Cruz from Highway 9 to the spa, basically. Check out that office space that's kind of past that. So mindful this isn't anything that's on Montebello, but that's at about 318,000 square feet for just that stretch of North Santa Cruz. And then I can look really quick in just a moment and tell you what Old Town is square footage wise, and that can kind of give you an idea. That's a pretty good mix of bigger stores and smaller stores.
Okay, that would be helpful. Well, if you could do that really quick, we can figure out the consensus on the 400,000 square feet. Yes.
So I'm not sure that what we have in town is a good comparison, because I don't think that's what we're trying to build is something, I know what Grosvenor's trying to build, and I agree with it. We're trying to build a different kind of shopping experience with general merchandising, which probably, I'm guessing, would have 3 anchor stores and around 50,000, just for argument's sake. So you've already chewed up 150. You've already got 66 out there. So you're already over 200 before you've started adding other stores in there. If you're going to do a comparison, I think you need to look at some different kind of strip mall, maybe something where the REI is or something like that, versus something in our town which we don't want to copy anyway.
Thank you. Let's just get the answer.
So for all the tenant spaces, that includes the upper floors, and then also some of the below ground at the rear by the amphitheater for Old Town is approximately 95,000 square feet.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
Is that inclusive of the university side? Across?
Yes.
So Gap and all that?
Correct.
It's 95,000. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the information. So knowing that, is there a consensus of the council on the maximum, again, I'm going to emphasize maximum 400,000 square foot figure? And I'm seeing people nod. Councilman Leonardis is undecided.
I was looking for another comparison. I mean, how large is Santana Row? Do we know square footage wise? Because our downtown is spread out, it's kind of it's less dense, it's spread out over more acreage. So I'm trying to figure out in a smaller amount of acreage, square footage.
So Ms. Wren will see if she can get specific information on that, and then we'll get back to you on that. And just for clarification, all of the C2 parcels, based on MetroScan data, the square footage of those is approximately 39 acres.
All right. Yes, I'm aware of that portion. Thank you.
Okay, so right now we have a 4-to-1 consensus with a 1 iffy on the 400,000 square feet. Let's discuss limitations on size within that 400,000 square feet. And we have Councilman Rennie's suggestion on the table. I have a question for staff before we start. Hypothetically, if there is a market hall that's developed and you guys want to figure out what you want to figure out or tell me something.
We were just trying to do a quick web search, and the town manager found the square footage for Santana Row. It's about 647,000 square feet of the retail commercial space.
Okay, Councilman Leonardis.
Does that also include any hotels? Is there a hotel there?
There is a hotel. Yes, that would include the hotel.
Okay, thank you.
And we're going to get to the discussion of the office and hotel, which is designated at 250,000 square feet separately. But right now, we're just doing commercial. So, Councilman Leonardis, does that affect your opinion with respect to the consensus on the 400,000?
I'm going to say it seems kind of large for me, but I'm one of four, so.
Okay, so we have a 4-to-1 consensus with a kind of, and remember, everyone, as we do these consensus, this is obviously going to come back to us. So to the extent that you're not comfortable with it, when there gets to be a formal motion on what this specific plan looks like, obviously you don't have to stick with the consensus. We're going to get new information. So my question with respect to the sizing or limitations on particular unit is, hypothetically, if there is a market hall. And when I think of a market hall, I'm thinking not necessarily of the Ferry Building, but there's one in Napa called Oxbow Market. But it's a large structure, and within the large structure are many individual units. And they could be cheese, they could be wine, they could be food, they could be sandwiches, they could be chocolate, they could be whatever they are. But they're individual users within a large space. So I don't know if this was discussed at the advisory committee or if staff has some notion about this, but how might those spaces be counted as toward a total square footage? Would it be the square footage of the container, or would it be the square footage of everything inside the container?
I would look to the North 40 Advisory Committee members that are on the council, but I believe it was contemplated that it'd be looking at the container.
Vice Mayor Spector.
I don't recall us discussing that specific issue at all. I definitely don't recall us making a decision on the container. That would be my inclination, but I don't recall any discussion.
Councilwoman Sayak?
I'm going to have to agree with Councilmember Spector. We didn't get to that level of specificity.
Okay. So I'm just going to throw out in our discussion of the limitations on the spaces is how we might be, the council in the specific plan might be looking at that kind of space. Because I could imagine there being a market hall that has all those spaces in it that I may not count against the percentage of each unit, or I may, depending on if that's the proper way to look at it, or I may not count each of the spaces in there where I could buy a hunk of cheese as a restaurant, which is why we're all going through our policies and figuring out what specialty retail is. If I sit down with my hunk of cheese, does it become a restaurant? How much? So, there's all kinds of ramifications for that kind of concept that I wouldn't want to necessarily limit, encourage, whatever it might be. I'd want to write a plan that would allow for that type of use, but at the same time, put what I think are reasonable limitations on other square footage uses in the plan. Does anyone have comments on that? Councilman Rennie.
So I actually had thought about suggesting, or I meant to suggest, didn't get to it, that we should exclude the market hall from it. And I'm making the assumption that the market hall is going to be food items and things. If it turned into stalls of dress shops and shoe shops, then we would be competing with downtown, and we'd end up with what we don't want. I guess there, I don't know, I don't understand completely market hall maybe, but I'm assuming that won't happen. It'll be food kinds of shops, in which case I'm okay having little ones for that, because I don't think that competes with downtown.
Other comments? Councilwoman Sayak.
So specifically with the market hall, we did not get into level of, are we counting it pads of 0 to 1,500? But definitely, as I was going through it, I was thinking of the square footage as a container. And there was a lot of discussion of having that container be flexible on the inside to change based on the seasonal items that were being produced in that area. So yes, the majority of the items under consideration was food, but then you get into these, is it retail if it's a bottle of oil, versus sitting down to eat with the bottle of oil. And that's where we didn't make any of those distinctions. So.
Okay, so having had thrown that out there, sorry, we still do have Councilman Rennie's, well, I can ask us to consider a couple of things. First, let's consider Councilman Rennie's suggestion of a maximum 30% below 5,000 square feet. Where are people on that suggestion? Vice Mayor Spector.
With the question. So if we say less than 30% on, give me the numbers again, please.
I believe Councilman Rennie suggested a maximum of 30% of commercial space at below 5,000 square feet.
So does that make it 120,000?
Don't ask me.
120,000 maximum of less than 5,000 square feet. I'm not ready to raise my hand on that one yet.
Councilman Leonardis.
The trouble I have with that is you could have, 120 shops at 1,000 square feet, potentially. I don't know if that's what they had in mind, but it could allow that based on Councilmember Spector's math.
Okay. Councilman Rennie, are you holding up your hand, or are you?
I guess so. I mean, from reading the Economist, I guess that's what we're calling him, the guy from San Jose State, he doesn't think it's likely that we're going to end up with a bunch of small shops like that. He actually even has a scenario that if you put no restrictions, you'd end up with something that doesn't compete with downtown. It would be much larger type sites. Some of the reason for that is, believe it or not, the retail space up there is going to be more expensive than it is downtown. I think sort of the common myth is downtown is more expensive than other places, and it's actually not. If you look in the report, downtown tends to be around $3 a square foot. There's some even less than that. They're expecting out there to be more $4 or $5 a square foot. So the ones that are going to want the small spaces are probably non-formula retail, which we're trying to scare away, but they're not going to be able to afford to be there. The formula retail or these other are going to want larger sites. So we're probably even wasting our time limiting it at my suggestion. I'm not too worried we're going to end up with 30,000 square foot spots.
Are you withdrawing your suggestion then?
No, I'll keep it there.
Okay, all right. I'm not prepared to go with your suggestion for the reasons that I've heard raised by other council people. Let me throw something out, and I'm not eliminating your suggestion, Councilman Remy. I'm just throwing this one out. But if council members turn to page 2-26 of their specific plan or recall it, 2.6.7 on page 2-26. There we go. It's up on the board. I'm wondering why that couldn't, in large part, mirror the language that we have for the residential uses, where the residential use says there shall be a mix of residential. So here we say we allow for a mix. Couldn't we say something like there shall be a mix, blah, 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 and then include a chart that is the same and or similar to the 2.7, like we do for the housing, as a hypothetical mix that people could refer to. And then if there is a market hall type thing proposed under the specific plan, I would imagine that would be, who knows how big it is, but if it's bigger than 50,000 square feet, allow that kind of container use to come in as a conditional use permit. So that's what I'm suggesting as a possible approach, which I'd love to hear people's comments on. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. Retaining 2.6.7 retail tenant space, I agree with that. A chart such as 2-7, I agree with that. I can't remember if you put specific numbers in there, but I would want the numbers of the small ones to be small, limited. I'm not prepared to have yet to have the market space to be a CUP. As we get into this, I want to try and limit the CUPs, so I'm not prepared to go there yet. It's a possibility.
Other comments? Councilwoman Sayoc.
I like the flexibility that the language allows for, but I'm trying to think of implementation. And so, should an application come forward, who decides what the appropriate mix of retail is? Who decides what smaller neighborhood serving versus the larger space? And I think that's where the North 40 Advisory Committee was grappling with, is because if you don't limit, whether it's by pad size or percentages, then 20 years from now, we just really have no control over what goes there. And so, we'll get to that eventually, but is there a way to combine pad sizes with other mechanisms so that there's a constant scrutiny of, is the theme, is the retail mix, is the whatever's being proposed, does it meet the vision of what this specific plan is?
And before we move on, I'm going to see if staff has any ideas, which they probably vetted with the advisory committee, to achieve the kind of scrutiny that Councilwoman Sayoc is talking about, or to allow for a more specific kind of oversight, if you will, of who decides what the mix is that's right. And I think you're going to say, well, put it in the plan, but is there something else that you could suggest?
Well, to go back to one of the questions, that who would make that decision would be the initial decision of the Planning Commission, I think, as it's written currently, for the ANS for the commercial projects. Now, the council could change that to have the council be the decision maker, but down the line, short of our typical mechanism, which would be CUPs, which I know some people and the council will discuss further. Otherwise, other commercial uses and commercial centers in town, we have requirements for CUPs for certain uses, and other uses can just switch out and evolve as the economy changes and those things change. So we can look at other mechanisms to control that, but I think that's based on our current town code of how we regulate the rest of the town currently. That's probably the easiest link would be, it's the discussion of should the North 40 have more CUPs or less than the downtown or some of the other areas of town. So unless Ms. Pravetti has anything else to offer.
I just want to say that as you look at the larger container of space, so say something does come in at 30,000 square feet, for example, it's not unusual for tenants to want to reconfigure that space over time. So if it is the will of the council to make sure that it doesn't get carved up into teeny tiny tenant spaces, we would need some kind of policy so that way when and if a tenant improvement program comes in through our building division where there is no additional discretionary policy, we could at least do some plan conformance and make sure that that tenant space still meets the specific plan. I'm just trying to think downstream 20 years from now, we might have approved a CUP with all intentions that it's basically just two tenants, but over time, maybe that gets carved up.
And I think that's, goes back to the table 2.7 with the percentages. If something like that is included in the plan, then it would have to go through potentially a specific plan amendment if, say, they started wanting to carve up those larger spaces because they would no longer meet those percentages that are reflected in the specific plan.
Okay, other comments or questions? Councilwoman Sayoc.
I just wanted to throw out there, one of the specific suggestions we received from North 40 Advisory Committee, as well as through public testimonies, that we look at an economic task force of some sort, whether it's a standing committee that looks at our commercial areas on a permanent basis. That could be a mechanism that staff can consider that could look into these issues, because one thing that I've heard consistently when looking at this North 40 as well as other areas is that retail will continually change based on the economics of the time. And so we get to this dilemma of how do we write a plan that can actually be flexible to reflect the economics and the retail of that particular time frame.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've heard, the concept of having an external group. Excuse me. Having an external group that gives input, and so far it hasn't been an idea that that has appealed to me. I really would like the specific plan to be a final document. I understand that there are challenges with that, but it is a preferable challenge to having it, for me, to having an external group.
Okay, let's see if we can go back to, right now we have a consensus on a maximum of 400,000 square feet. Let's do an up or down on Councilman Rennie's suggestion of a 30% limitation on below 5,000 square feet. Who is in favor of that? Councilman Rennie. So I'm thinking that we're going to eliminate that. The other suggestion was to look at 2.6.7, and where if we look at the chart on the first sentence where it says specific plan allows for a mix of retail uses, instead say the specific plan shall create a mix of retail uses. And then include some kind of hypothetical example such that was included for residential types in the glossary for the residential. Is there anyone who's interested in pursuing that idea? Seeing no, Councilman Leonardis.
I will support that idea.
I'm not sure I like the shall. It seems like we're going the wrong direction. We're forcing maybe things smaller just so that we meet that. I know we said we want some smaller, but I'm struggling with it a little bit. What are we really trying to achieve with shall, and does it really have any meaning there?
I guess as the suggester, what I was trying to do was mirror the language that we have for the residential use, so that we could have consistency across the specific plan, where for residential use we said shall have a mix of different kinds of product types, and then referred to the glossary chart. So what I'm suggesting simply is a mirror here with a shall, indicating that we want a mix, and then referring, as we did with the residential, to a chart. That's the complete notion, was to have some consistency in the references.
So I'm not quite sure that we really want a mix. I think what we want is something that doesn't compete with downtown, which may be different than trying to get a mix.
Okay. Other comments on that suggestion? Councilwoman Sayak.
So the chart that it would refer to, do we have a chart in mind, or?
Nope.
Okay.
No, I was using the 2.7.
The 2.7.
And I'm just throwing these things out for discussion. So, if it's got support, fine, we can discuss it further. If it doesn't have support, we'll move on to see if there's another suggestion. So I think it's me and Councilman Leonardis that are, yes, Councilman Sayak.
I guess the devil's in the details. I would support the idea, but it gets into what does the chart look like.
Okay, so let's see if there's other suggestions on how to tackle this. Does anyone have another suggestion on how to tackle it? We could, of course, just leave it the way it is. That's always an option. In the outline that I was distributed for discussion, it was consider the commercial square footage. Should there be a specific mix of commercial types and uses? We've discussed that. Should there be any limitations on units of any particular size? I think we've done those discussions. So the question is, do we think that we should change what we have, or should we simply leave it the way it is? And if we want to change it, what are the suggestions for changing it? Vice Mayor.
Thank you. It seems to me that, okay, I think that 2.6.7 is too general. I believe we do need specificity. I believe a table such as 2-7 would be preferable to not having a table. And other than liking a small number of store sizes at 0 to 3,000, I have no further input.
Councilman Leonardis.
Again, I will support the idea of the table and the 0 to 3,000 categories, the 0 to 1,500 and whatever the two bottom tiers were. I would recommend cutting those in half, having them 2.5% and 2.5% of the total.
Okay, let me try this. Is there a consensus on whether the language in 2.6.7 is too general, as the Vice Mayor indicated? Do people think that it's too general, or are they okay with it? I think it's too general. We have two that think it's too general. Okay, I'm going to go out this way because I'm getting blank looks. Let's try this. Okay, I'm going to have you raise your hand. Do people believe that there should be some form of definition, limitation, whatever, beyond what's written here for the type and size of commercial use within the 400,000 square feet? Raise your hand if you think that that's the case. All right. Raise your hand if you think that there should be some kind of chart, whatever form that might take, that can be used as a reference from this language that we can include in our specific plan. Okay. Now, how many people think that there should be anything added or changed about B on 2.6.7, the maximum individual commercial retail tenant size is 50,000 square feet? Do people think that that's fine, should be higher, lower? What do they think? Councilman Leonardis.
I think we should consider it to be higher. I'm thinking of all possibilities here. There could be a car dealership or somebody wants to come in. I don't know. So I was just thinking in reference to what Councilmember Rennie had said previously about Safeway being 55,000 square feet. I don't know if there will be a Safeway there, but if it's just over 50, if it's 60,000, if it's something, it would be nice to have the options. I believe you can always chop it down smaller, but you can't necessarily chop it up bigger. So that's why I said 80,000. I also thought about perhaps a building with a 1 acre footprint with a second story, and that would be 80,000 or up to 80,000.
Councilman Rennie.
I think what we want to avoid is large box, and I'm not sure where that starts. Maybe council can help us. What's a typical Walmart, for example, or a Costco?
While they're looking, the Vice Mayor suggested that she is not comfortable with a CUP designation. How do other people feel about keeping B as it is, but saying the maximum individual commercial retail tenant size shall be 50,000 square feet, absent a CUP approving a greater square footage? So putting a CUP designation on that. How do people feel about that? Councilwoman Sayoc.
I don't think CUPs are the appropriate way to regulate pad sizes. But I'm wondering, I'm looking to staff, are there alternative ways to do it? Obviously, one way is to just, should an application come forward that's 55,000 square feet, it would have to come for a specific plan amendment. Is that How difficult is that, I guess, is the first question.
Well, I would look to Ms. Pravetti, but you end up going through a similar process to this one, maybe with, a very specific topic, so probably not taking as long. But there are specific legal requirements that you have to meet to go through that amendment, whereas if you provide flexibility up front, you avoid going through that specific plan amendment.
A specific plan amendment is very similar to a general plan amendment, so you would need a recommendation from your planning commission, noticed public hearings, et cetera.
Okay, let me try this. We had a consensus on modifying the language to include different sizes and types. We had a consensus of spaces. We had a consensus on including some type of chart. Could we get a consensus on the chart including proposals for units over 50,000 square feet and do it that way? Because right now we've maxed our chart out, or at least our sample chart. Is there a consensus that we should think about? I'll get an answer. Will I get an answer? Oh, the size of a Walmart.
So these type of places can range. They're typically in the 150 square foot range. Places such as Target and Walmart have moved to creating a smaller floor plate for areas such as this. Sometimes they do a two-story type thing. There's a Whole Foods in San Francisco that's about 40,000 square feet on each floor, so you get closer to the 100 there. There's also a Target, rumored that a Target can do somewhere in the 50 to 60 with a very small floor plate.
Okay, so just so we can try to move forward on this, summarizing the consensus items again was the more specific language, a mix of size and use, a possible example, a hypothetical chart. And my question now is, should that chart include contemplated uses in square foot plate size of over 50,000 square feet? Councilman Leonardis.
I think it's a good idea since to add that to the chart.
Others. Thoughts?
I was going to say, in absence of committing to a number of 80,000 or less.
My problem with committing to just picking another number is that you could always pick a number. And so if we're going to go through an exercise of talking about how big things should be or how small, it makes more sense to me to say you could have one of them, you could have two of them, you could have whatever, rather, if we're not going to go the CUP route, than just picking a number. Because somebody will always come in with something higher. So I'm looking to seeing, I think I got a consensus on a chart. Now I'm looking to see if I have a consensus for, maybe we should think about it as Councilman Leonardis had said he wants the smaller square footages reduced on the percentage in the 2.7 chart. Do we have a consensus on that? Yes? Yes, okay, so we got that. Yes.
Before I raise my hand, or I already raised my hand, but are we doing 2.5% of total on the 0 to 1.5 and 1.5 to 3,000? Is that what I just raised my hand for?
That's what I understood Councilman Leonardis' suggestion to be?
That's fine.
Okay, so let's see who's raising their hand on that one. Okay, we got 4, we got 5.
Well, question, so that's 2.5% of the 0 to 1,500 and the 1,500 1 to 3,000, right? Those two?
I think that's the suggestion, yes.
My intention was to make the 5% 2.5%, the other 5% 2.5%.
Okay, so that comes to about 10,000 total per each.
The logic was, say you have 1,000 square feet at 5%, and that was 20 units at 1,000 square feet. It would bring it down to like 10 units, if my math is correct on that.
Okay.
Based on 400,000.
So I think we have a consensus on that, which I'm going to say is 2.5% on 0 to 15, 2.5% on 1501 to 3,000. Then leaving aside the other figures for now, how many people believe that there should be an added square, for lack of a better term, for any units above 50,000 square feet?
Can I comment on that?
Yes.
So I have to confess, I did a little research based on what Ms. Wren's comments were about the size of a Target Express or the one at Westgate, so to speak. And that is kind of what is driving my idea. Not that I'm suggesting that Target goes there, but there is instances such as the Whole Foods where they do a second story and it's a 30 to 40,000 square foot on top of each other. So with respect to what Councilmember Rennie said earlier, a Costco or a Walmart or something, that's 150,000 square feet. I mean, when we think of terms of big box, that's way big box. That's not what we're looking for. But when I think of 50,000, that was about the size of the Borders in Old Town before they divvied it all up or something. I'm pretty sure that's what it was, like 55,000 square feet. So I don't want to limit ourselves to be so small that it's not attractive to a potential tenant. And I don't believe in the CUP process of saying, okay, well, let's add 5,000 with the CUP. So I'm trying to add flexibility. It doesn't have to be 80, but it could be more than 50.
So I hear you arguing that, yes, there should be an additional section on whatever chart the council decides to attach to this that should include units, however many percentage or whatever it is, that's over 50,000, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So who is with Vice Mayor Spector?
It's not that I disagree with Councilmember Leonardis that we could have something above 50,000. I'm just not seeing the magic in these numbers. I mean, is the magic that it's greater than 50,000 and 50,000 is written on this page, or is there a logic to it? So my mind's open to it, but I just not seeing the rationale.
Councilman Rennie, did you have your hand up?
Well, we're on a different subject, but I'll address this subject. Okay. It doesn't sound like anybody can remember where the 50,000 came from, and for Councilman Leonardis has come up with some potentials that are larger than that, and I know Grosvenor is thinking of some that are larger than that. It just feels like 50,000 is the wrong number. I think we'd be okay at 80,000. I think I'm more happy changing that number to 80,000. I think that would fit most of what we want. Let me go to my other comment. I guess I raised my hand, but I think I'm a little uncomfortable reducing the percentages on the small size. I'm thinking, this is a pretty big area, and remember, it's any kind of commercial that you might also put in the transition district, or mixed in with the residential for coffee shops and so forth. Councilwoman Sack before, reminded us we're trying to do some neighborhood serving. I don't know what the size of a coffee shop is, but I'm worried that we've limited it down too much. Maybe we can compromise and keep the 1,500 to 3,000 at 5% and lower the other to 2.5%.
So here's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to see if the council agrees that we ask staff, just like we've asked staff for information regarding the residential units. If we ask our staff to come back to us with suggested possible edits for 2.6.7, which include language regarding mix and size limitations, that we get a proposed chart. And when I think about the chart, I'm not thinking of it as a mandatory chart. I'm thinking of it as the same kind of chart that was included for the glossary as a hypothetical for the residential, and just have that come back to us in an iteration from staff that at least we could take a look at, so that we have something specific that we can discuss. How do people feel about that suggestion? If you're okay with it, raise your hand. Okay, so that's what we're going to do on that. I don't think, that's kind of the questions I had regarding the breakdown of the commercial. which included square footage conditional use permits. We've discussed that. I think the council's consensus is that they do not want to include conditional use permits. We did not discuss, because it's probably better left for another discussion that the council is going to have. One of the notes I put in the outline, which was another way to address issues with respect to the downtown, would be to discuss eliminating what I'm going to call competition issues for regulations that are in the downtown. So formula retail, outdoor seating, whatever it might be, that may affect, if we're talking about we want there to be a level playing field, how do we create that level playing field? And is there, if the council so desires, is there a way to put that in the specific plan? So I'm just going to ask people to, if you want to just comment generally on it and that notion, but I'm not sure, I'm going to look to staff, is the specific plan where we ought to be discussing that, or should we just be discussing that independently? Vice Mayor Spector.
Not in the specific plan.
Okay, and I'm getting nods on that. So I'm just going to put that on the table, to not put in the specific plan, but to discuss at a future meeting where it's appropriate.
Madam Mayor, though, if I may?
Yes.
I agree it should not be in the specific plan, but I do think we have to have that conversation in parallel, because there are certain policies we could do downtown that would help. And they're part of the discussion and the overall context. And so would we have those conversations on a parallel track?
I don't know that we'd necessarily be having them on a parallel track, but your mayor has put on the agenda a discussion of those items. I can't remember which date I put it on right now. I think May, but it could also come up on March 17th when we discuss the alcohol and entertainment policy. Okay, so not in the specific plan. It's now 10 minutes to 11. We've gotten through point 1 in the outline, point 2 and point 3. We still have point 4, point 5, point 6. Oh, we have to do office, sorry. So let's discuss office. I'm going to tell the people in the audience that where we're probably not going to get tonight is a discussion of the density intensity of what we put in the plan, which is going to include open space, orchard set-asides, trees, structures, public open space, private open space, how open space is determined across the plan, height, commercial, residential. That's a section. The next thing is going to be transportation and sustainability, which is going to include traffic mitigation, alternate transportation, bikes, parking strategies, etc. And then we might be able to do, well, we'll see. Let's discuss office and hotel first, because if we look back, Mr. Paulson, at that chart, there we go at the very top. It's 250,000 square feet for office and hotel. Comments, questions? Vice Mayor Spector.
This discussion I do remember from the advisory committee. See, so does Ms. Sayoc. This was not a big debate in the sense that the committee felt that giving the property the option of having a hotel was a good thing, that our financial analysis and economic analysis that we received indicated that a hotel would be used or could be used, especially with the plethora of people using or going to the hospitals around there, and having friends or relatives stay overnight, and also business uses. And the same thing with regard to the office. There was not a big debate there. I know that there are some individuals who have concerns about medical, and I can appreciate that. But our committee and the economic information that we received indicated that offices such as startup offices, that kind of innovation office, whatever you want to call it, that those were needs in our community that were not being met. So that one I do remember.
Thank you. Other discussion? Councilman Rennie.
So I think we might want to consider breaking out office and hotel. I would be scared of 250,000 square feet of all office in there. I'm definitely like the idea of a hotel and a conference center. I think there should be some office. I think I'm buying the argument that we should maybe limit not allowing medical office. But the way it reads, you could end up with no hotel and 250,000 square feet of office, which is quite a bit.
Vice Mayor Spector.
I remember that discussion also. The reason that we have the 250,000 is because we were told, again, from experts and economic analysis, that a hotel, and this is a relatively small one, a hotel shouldn't be smaller than that in order to be viable. Now, that might beg the question of whether or not there should be office at all, or whether there should be an or there. But that was the rationale for that number, as far as I can recall.
Councilwoman Sayoc.
I'm definitely in favor of keeping hotel, and the discussion definitely centered on 250 with the idea that conference centers was an unmet need in town, and that a hotel is a logical place to add the square footage so that we could provide some conference facilities for our town. The office, given what we now know about our jobs housing balance, as well as the impacts to traffic, I am perfectly comfortable taking office out.
So I will comment on this. I am in favor of the hotel as well. I would argue for office. I would argue against medical office. I think it's no longer an unmet need, particularly in that area of town. I think it's a huge traffic generator. I would, because we've discussed the types and designations of residential, I would also put a limitation on the types and designation for office. So I could see, and I don't know what this would be, the square footage, for example, of an incubator or a startup space, or that may be something like, not called that, but like an office for 10 people, for example. And I could see that office as being symbiotic with a small residential area where a 25-year-old would work all day in the office, come back to his 1,000 square foot unit, go to coffee, go to get food, do whatever, all in the same space. And I actually see that as a potential traffic mitigation. That may be an ideal world, but you have to build for that kind of thing. So when I say I don't have a problem with office, I would limit the type of office I was thinking of, and that may be a limitation based on a square foot of unit, because not calling it a particular thing, but by making it smaller. I also see that as working with a hotel, because if I am an office space, I could bring people to the hotel, talk to them about my product, whatever it might be, that would create some kind of working space within that plan, rather than bringing cars for whatever it might be for the medical. So I am for office and I am for hotel, but I'm for some kind of designation of office space. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I don't disagree. The thing is, what we have to keep in mind is that 250,000 is a plan. I mean, this is the specific plan. We're not building a hotel, and we're not building offices. And so if we say it's office and we get rid of medical and we say it's office and hotel, that leaves the individual or company that ultimately develops the property the option of one and or the other. So I agree with the mayor that there are certain kinds of offices and we can call them whatever is appropriate. We can specifically exclude medical. In my, ideal world 2 years ago when we were first working on this, there was an office, incubator offices by the hotel, and they worked together really well, but that may not be the real world.
Other comments on this? Councilman Rennie, were you putting your hand up?
Yeah, I think I just want to go back to my comment because it doesn't sound like it was understood very well. My concern is getting all office, and I sort of like your idea of maybe creating a chart, but I don't want to get too much detail. Another alternative may just be, it's 250,000 office hotel total with office not to exceed 100,000 or something like that. I would feel more comfortable with.
Okay, having that in mind that Councilwoman Rennie just said, is there a consensus on keeping an office and a hotel, but limiting the office in some fashion? So raise your hand if you think that's fine. Okay, so staff, we are going to look to you to come back to us with a chart or language that will be indicative of the direction that the council wants on that, which is 250,000 is fine, hotel is fine, office is fine with limitations, as we've discussed. Okay. I would like us to tackle, I'm going to ask council if they want to tackle the question of one of the things that's been raised by the public and has come up a lot with respect to this specific plan is whether or not there should be any, again, I'm going to say set aside within the plan for a school site. And do people want to take that on tonight at 11 o'clock, or do people want to defer that to a next discussion? Councilwoman Sayoc.
So there's an education summit next week that all council members and planning commissioners and the public have been invited to. And I actually think next week's discussion might provide valuable information for that specific item.
That is an excellent point, and that is on February 12th, I believe, correct? 8 to 2 at Los Gatos Lodge, for those of you who are interested. Okay. Looking to the council again, I think we've had a productive discussion. I know it's been slow, so thank you for your patience, but we want to be thorough and fair and try to make the best decision that we can. Do we want to try to take on density, intensity, open space, heights, et cetera tonight? Or do we want to save that for another day when we get back information from the staff on the other points? Councilman Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. I say we save that for another day.
Others? I don't.
It's not very straightforward discussion, so I think maybe we should save it also.
Okay. I'm not getting any protests about that. So I hesitate whether to ask Ms. Pravetti or Mr. Larson to tell us the consensus motions that you've heard. I don't particularly want to do that. I think we've been pretty clear in the record. So I think our next decision is when we will come back to this. And ladies and gentlemen, our next meeting, we are going to be discussing Hillbrook. So I'm not so sure we want to put this on. And perhaps, Mr. Larson, you can remind us, March 3rd, we have the joint school study session, and remind me what else we have on that date.
We have tentatively scheduled, pending mayor's concurrence, the mid-year budget review and the fees and charges. And those are substantive items. I'm looking to Ms. Pravetti for any land use matters coming forward that night.
Minor ones, annexations, et cetera.
Okay, I'm going to look to my fellow council people and try to get some indication. Does March 3rd, given those items, make sense for continuing the discussion? Okay, so I am going to then make a motion to continue this matter to March 3rd. Is there a second? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. So we will next consider the North 40, continue our discussion on March 3rd. Thank you all very much for attending. Thank you all for your input. We appreciate it very much. And good evening.